was you competed against Mike O'Hearn in the 95 California State Powerlifting Championships. So we'll pull the video up real quick and we'll just kind of click through there, but you beat him, right? So that's kind of so tell me the story as we kind of click through this, and he'll find, I think that's just the deadlifts, right?
Yes, my YouTube channel is Paul Leonard 71, so it does have some footage from that 95 Cal State meet. So yes, but let it be noted that Steve Dennison beat me in total.
Okay,
well, second.
Going into this, where were you ranked to Mike?
Yeah, I knew who Mike.
No. I mean, it's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. All right, guys, we're back with another episode of Table Talk. Today, my guest is Paul Leonard. I want to thank you for coming out because you've been discussed a couple times with Josh when he's come out here. I've known of you since forever, right? You have almost 40 years, as a strength athlete. Did your first meet in 88?
86.
Associate 86. It was 86.
Yes, sir.
That's open powerlifting, right?
Yeah, I like those guys, but it's not. They're about 90% there.
Yeah, there's a lot of mine that are still missing off of there, but fortunately not any of the best ones. So I'm good with that. Where I was actually kind of looking yesterday to see if we were in any of the same meets together because we were competing around the same time. And there was one of the IPA meets that you did in York where I wasn't at that one because I had shoulder surgery. So it would have been at that one out of all those that were in there. So we'll get to it. But there was a time when the IPA and the APF were, Louis was kind of going through, screw the APF, we're going to go to the IPA and da-da-da. We'll get into all that. But anyhow, you wrote articles forever in PL USA, bodybuilding.com, Jailhouse Strong. You're the author of Built by History. And from that introduction, is there anything that I didn't put in your bio that I should put in there?
No, you gave me plenty chance to add to it and so forth. So the only thing I'd like to add is I've tried to give back to the sport now by announcing. So I'm affiliated with USPA. Steve Dennison brought me out to the Nationals this year in Vegas. I did that, and I'll be doing the IPL Worlds in November. So I've tried to do everything at a meet to support powerlifting, Dave, in my life, but I'm not a judge. So I haven't gone that road. Yeah, I've heard your take on that similar to mine. So, but I get the pleasure of doing that. In the state of Arizona, our state chairman, Danny Swaya, is amazing, and his gym down in Tucson Strength I support. He hired us first, and I also do strongman. I did the past two strongman nationals. I announced them for USS. So Willie Wessels is a good friend of mine, and he runs an amazing organization, as does Steve Dennison with the USPA powerlifting. So that's who I support.
Okay, so where I want to jump off on, just for the clickbaity stuff, as we were talking about before we started, was you competed against Mike O'Hearn in the 95 California State Powerlifting Championships. So we'll pull the video up real quick and we'll just kind of click through there, but you beat him, right? So that's kind of so tell me the story as we kind of click through this, and he'll find, I think that's just the deadlifts, right?
Yes, my YouTube channel is Paul Leonard 71, so it does have some footage from that 95 Cal State meet. So yes, but let it be noted that Steve Dennison beat me in total.
Okay,
well, second.
Going into this, where were you ranked to Mike?
Yeah, I knew who Mike.
No. I mean, but in the meet, because it's just the deadlifts that we're seeing here. So where were the?
Oh yeah, no, I needed to pull that 705 to win.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
All right.
So there's my friend Steve Dennison. He won, and this year, Steve, after that, went to the Nationals, and he came in second that year at the Nationals in Louisiana to Kirk Kowalski. That's when he did his 1,003. I didn't go to the Nationals. I just need to get stronger.
Yeah. Well, what reminds me here is, back in the day, we had meets in gyms, right? So you see the basketball court or the basketball hoop in the back, right? And that's where the best meets were. They were in gyms, and then I don't know what happened. They moved to hotels later, probably because we got thrown out of gyms.
Yeah, that was the El Toro Air Force Base. That's Tustin, Southern California. That's no longer. They've flattened that, and I think it's real land right now and houses. But
yeah,
there's Bob Packer, long time powerlifting. Oh yeah. So that's on YouTube. Has about 280,000 hits and over 1,000 comments, which
I didn't look at those. I'm going to have to look at those later.
yeah, when we drove to the Strongman Nationals 2 years ago to stay awake, we drove 17 hours straight to bring our equipment to broadcast. My partner in broadcasting, Sean Christ, read them, and some of them are hilarious. I didn't know things about duck eggs, and I was kind of out in left field.
Yeah.
So what had happened is during the pandemic, I was training a couple kids, college football players, and they couldn't go back to Colorado. So I was like, when I came into Elite today, I saw all your Powerlifting USAs. I have over 1,000 magazines. I have all Powerlifting USAs, but I also have some old videotapes. So the pandemic was a different day and age. So we'd stream live sports in my garage when we'd train, like there was no live sports. So I found these old videotapes and I started playing them. And the two kids I trained with, like, oh my God, you beat Mike O'Hearn. I go, yeah, there was like 5 guys stronger in my garage every Saturday. John out there, and they're like, no, you don't understand. I didn't know what an influencer was, if you will.
Okay.
But I have the utmost respect for Mike, and anybody that steps on the platform. But yeah, before I moved to California, I was working at GNC. It was one of my jobs. So I'd read the muscle magazines, and I'd seen his picture. And the thing about muscle magazines back then, in the whatever you want to call him, it was alleged he was squatting 800, and I'm like, man, that guy sounds strong. You know what I'm saying? And that was where I had awareness from him.
Yeah.
But that day of that meet, the Cal State meet was, if you were to look, like Hank Hill, super heavyweight.
I competed against him one time.
Yeah, ridiculous.
Jacked, man.
Yeah, jacked, and he won the supers at well over 2,000 pounds.
Yeah.
So, and then in the 242s that day, Anthony Hardridge squatted 832.
Mm-hmm.
So to go to a California meet, and if you look at that meet in the background, you see like Larry Kidney, Terry McCormick, Dave Shaw, powerlifting royalty. So there was a time where, as growing up, not to get on a tangent, but we probably will, but like, I knew the history of California powerlifting. You're honored to. The state meet was a big deal.
Yeah.
It was a big deal. So that was, at the time, I was 27 years old. I just turned 27. That was 1995. And that total ended up being 1779. So I went 3 for 3 in the squat, got up to 661. My bench, I only got 413, and they red lighted me on 424. So I was behind, but I needed to pull those 3 deadlifts. And at that time, by maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves, but at that time in 95, that was the beginning. 94 was, I had bought the West Side tapes from Louis in 1993 because I had done traditional linear periodization up to a certain point, got to like 1,600 pounds in total, started my law enforcement career, so I had to lose weight and run somewhat. But then the West Side tapes changed my life because I didn't point out all those people in the background, but I was at a gym where there was like half the people like, I believe in what Paul's doing, he's getting stronger, and the other half like, that stuff will never work.
Oh yeah.
So it was like
kind of like it is now still.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. They're like, so, but yeah, it's,
I have a story about Hank Hill because I forget what meet it was, but I was competing against him and he come walking in the warm-up room. I mean, the dude was jacked, man.
Yeah, he was.
And I remember saying something to Louis about it. I'm like, man, look at that guy. He's like, that's the last person you need to worry about. He's got too much muscle. He trains like a bodybuilder. Don't worry about that. And in my mind, I'm trying to like process this. And it was true. I mean, he's still strong as fuck. I'm not going to take anything away from the guy. But back in that time, if they looked like that, they were strong, but they probably weren't going to beat a Scott Warman or something like that because
right,
different type of training, the higher reps and not doing enough of the maximal stuff or whatever with that. But man, it was probably one of the most muscular 308s, I think he was.
Yeah, he was full super.
Yeah,
every time I saw him.
Yeah.
He's the first person I've ever spotted squatting 903. Like there was a gym in California that was booming back in the day, Powerhouse Gym, Fountain Valley. So, when I wasn't competing, I would go to meets, that's kind of a different thing now too. When I announce, I see people don't show up in their own town and they train, be that as it may. Like, yeah, his bench was only like 525 or maybe 530, but he squatted 900.
Yeah. The bench,
and his deadlift was in the low 8s, like,
like
832, or like very, very strong man. I never got the chance to train with him. I seen him train a few times, and super impressive.
Just freaking impressive.
Yeah.
How did you get into powerlifting?
So I was fortunate enough growing up in Boston, when I was lifting weights with high school football, which I love. I went to Boston Latin. which is the oldest public high school in the country, and it's kind of a big deal in that world, and it was great. But we had a great football team, great program, so we lifted. We really didn't know what we were doing per se. Like we had no coaching. We had 2 benches. The varsity was the wide one that fit, and the narrow uprights. So when my
I remember those.
Yeah. So if you couldn't bench the plate for 10 reps, you had to get on the junior varsity bench. You're shamed, and then hit the universal machine. You know, the 6 stations in the one room we had for weights. We would lift out in the hallway. So when football ended, I was training at the West Roxbury YMCA. So back in the day when a YMCA was like, you know, I know they had the Y Nationals here, Gary Benford, Louie, and you probably competed in it. It was like it was the second tier meet in the United States under the Nationals.
Yes,
but regardless, Massachusetts had a fantastic YMCA, old black iron. It had multiple weight rooms around the facility. You would go down because racquetball was kind of dying out, so there was still a racquetball court, but one side of the racquetball court was all old Jubenville weights, like black iron weights, you know, and York weights. So I'm training there, and like soon, right after high school football ends, you play your senior year, you play on Thanksgiving Day. There was like a sign like, hey, powerlifting, January 11th here. I'm like, oh, what's that? Let me come check that out. So me and a couple of my buddies did it, and I totaled a whopping 980 I had never deadlifted. I didn't know what a deadlift was. So I remember I went 315, 260, 400 at whatever, get to 980 at, I was about 230, 220, 6. I used to be 6'1.5". I'm a little bit shorter.
Yeah. What position did you play?
I played guard.
Okay.
I was pretty good. And I enjoyed the heck out of it. I loved it. I mean, it gave me so much confidence. Our football team was amazing. Like you finish my junior year, we were better. We were 9-1. We should have gone to what's the Super Bowl there. But my senior year, we were 6-4. And those are still some of the best friends that I have to this day. The group in my phone, we still talk. We just, you finish off, you play. Now they play you play your Thanksgiving Day game at Harvard University at the field, but we did at BU, and there's 30,000 people there, and it's on cable.
Okay.
So until I moved to California and then lived in Texas, I didn't see, you know, that one day is a big deal, but it's not like high school football.
So this first meet, was this your junior year?
No, that was my senior year.
Your senior year?
I was 17 years old because I was born in April. So I did that meet, and I was hooked. I found out in the newspaper there was a bench meet, so that was the first time I ever went and see other powerlifters that were like, you know, a guy benched 500, and I was like, oh my goodness. And there was a table selling wares, and I bought my first Powerlifting USA, and I've been hooked ever since. I was like, I couldn't read enough. Rick Weil was on the cover.
Yeah, really,
at the Y Nationals at 181, he benched triple bodyweight raw, and I was looking at that like, you know, and
crazy.
I was like, how? Like, how? You know what I'm saying? So fortunately, growing up in Massachusetts, there was great gyms and great people everywhere that would help you out. You know what I'm saying? That would.
Did you seek out one that had a crew of powerlifters?
I did. So I kept training at the Y and started college. And then I was kind of sad when I was so tight with my high school friends. I was sad because in Massachusetts, all my buddies went scattered to the winds, went to different schools, different states. And I was like, so I enrolled at Northeastern University, which is a great school. And, you know, if you've heard of it, like looking back now, there were guys that had gone there like Ernie Hackett, who came in third at World's Strongest Man in 2002, Bob Dempsey, who was a huge national level powerlifter so it has a history of strength. But I got there and it wasn't, you know, I needed to concentrate on my academics. I'd been kind of a goof off in high school, you know what I'm saying? And they had a football team, and I had a few chances to play football other places, but I was like, no, I got to really take this serious. I'm going to, and I love lifting. I was like, man, I don't want to, you know, the feeling when as a lineman, when you're like exhausted and then you lose a game because a punter drops the ball, you're like, you just.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. That's what brought me into the sport. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you couldn't, you had one job. But I like the idea I love powerlifting from the get go, you know, and getting into it at 17, like in the subjective world of a teenager, you know, there's nothing more subjective than teenage boy, but like, I'm like, oh my God, this is objective. I'm getting bigger, immediately got bigger and stronger. My dad wasn't a lifter at all, but but at the gym, like people would take you serious if you took it serious, you know, and older people were always willing to mentor me, you know, and that little YMCA had a few good lifters, but then I found out about a place a couple miles away, called Workout Plus, which to this day, it closed in 96, and the owner's still alive. God bless him, but he's got severe Alzheimer's. But I reconnected with his daughter on social media a couple years ago because she's a professional skier, and she was in the Olympics. Her name's Jackie Peso. So I had always heard about this gym, Workout Plus, and we called it WAP for short.
Yeah.
That's not an ethnic slur.
Yeah.
Don't take it, even though I'm Irish. But like, we'd go, hey, we're going to hit WAP. And I went up there. That was the first time I saw real power lifters. You know, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned Dick because after I trained there a year, so then I did my first official meet in October of 1986, and I totaled 1250 at a meet up in New Hampshire, which was USPF sanctioned. I went 440. My bench was still terrible, 270 and then 550. So I hit like a 1250 total. But I was, I came in adult men's 15 out of 17 or 18 guys, but I wasn't dissuaded at all. I'm like, man, this is, because as you probably remember back then, Powerlifting USA, when you read it, it was like, there was the teen nationals would have a page or two, and the collegiate nationals.
Yeah.
I was in college then. I'm like, man, I don't want the collegiate nationals. Like my senior year of high school, I read that like at the teen nationals, Anthony Clark benched 611. I'm like, that's going to take a while.
Yeah.
But I was committed in college to get my degree and also to definitely powerlift, which I was able to do all those.
So at that time, it was federation-wise, we basically had the USPF, the APF, and the ADFPA.
Exactly.
So maybe the AAU was around. I don't know if NASA was around, but the only ones I really kind of knew, because when I first came in, basically all there really was the USPF. And then the falling out or whatever created the APF, and then kind of going that route. Which route did you go? Did you go...
I would go USPF and ADFPA because they were both strong in Massachusetts.
Okay.
So my goal, I was definitely determined to stay drug-free. About a year into training, I was training with this guy who'd been in the Coast Guard, Dennis Caholen, if you're out there, thank you. He gave me every powerlifting USA. So it had started in 77, and this was like 87, like 10 years of them. So I was able to study the history, and I was like, and a lot of, even those old magazines would make information about the drug issue, if you will. You could take performance enhancing drugs or you couldn't. And I was a teenager, so I figured out, I want to get into law enforcement, and I love my parents. And at the same time, remember the late 80s, two things happened like in the late 80s. It was the AIDS epidemic was announced. I'm like, oh my God, needles, that's scary. And who knows? And then the war on drugs.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to get involved in this. They weren't even illegal then, but it made sense to me after reading and doing my education, because the same guy that gave me those books, I got the underground steroid handbooks. I read both of those. Like, I mean, talk about spot on information from Dan Duchesne.
Yeah.
And they're prophetic. And he's like, you don't want to take that. You don't want to take any performance enhancing hormones until you're fully developed as a male, which is like age 24, 25. And I said, okay. And that made sense to me. When you look back at the history of powerlifting, I was able to read the books at the time, the magazines, and like, man, there's some guys flash in the pan. They've done some fantastic lifts, but they would fizzle out for whatever reason. You'd figure, well, that's probably not the way you want to go. And I didn't have any money, Dave. I mean, I worked, but I had to pay for my own college and all that good stuff. So
yes, so did I. Different times now, right? So through college, your education was the first priority, then powerlifting was the second priority.
Yeah, they were tied for sure. I mean, I was committed to getting an education, but I mean, I was determined to become the best powerlifter I could be. I mean, I loved it, and I went by the standard during that period of time. Like I had read everybody I could. So I read some Ken Leisner information, which was good. It said like, a drug-free athlete should be able to go up 100 pounds in total in the first, when they pick 4 years for high school and the Olympic cycle and the quadrennial, if you will, in 4 years, if you don't make significant progress, you've like do something else or figure out that you're not going to be the best. Because so college being, in my case, my college was a 5-year school because you started it, did 3 semesters, then half the year you were at work full time. It was called co-op. Most people know that as an internship, and then half the year you were at school full time.
Okay. The reason I ask is for me, powerlifting was first. The education was a distant second, but I knew I had to get a degree, but it took me longer to get the degree because training times. Right, because if I had a class at the same time that our crew was training, then I'm not taking that class. Did you run into those issues?
No, I didn't. In that, even though I was at college, I didn't train with the collegiate powerlifting team. Like now, today, Northeastern and a lot of these places have them. And I had some friends there that were powerlifting, but they divide you in divisions. So my friend, Jim Soroka, he became the national champion the year we went to the nationals in 90 in the super heavyweight, but he was in a different division, so we couldn't even train together. Mm-hmm. So what I was training at night with grown men. Okay. So get your stuff done during the day. And then, to this day, between 7 and 9 o'clock, I'm like a werewolf. I'm most awake. Yeah. This is something.
So how did you train then? How was the training set up?
So I joined that gym, Workout Plus. And then after joining for a year, the owner approached me, Dick Peso. He says, I'd like to sponsor you. He had been like he was on the 1960 Oklahoma National Football Championship team. He was just so athletic and like such. He played semi-pro when there was like the league in Vegas. And he's just such a great guy. And he's like, I'll sponsor you. So I would just in that gym was a huge gym, Workout Plus. And I would say there was 15 to 20 powerlifters. Mm-hmm. Everyone from a 132er named Bob Kaufman, who had done the nationals. He was really helpful. He was a great guy. He taught me how to promote. We promoted some bench meets. A couple years later, he brought out Laura Dodd. Yeah. And I met her and she was really nice. And she was talking to me. She was like, oh, what do you lift? And she's like, tell me about West Side. And I was like, ooh, I don't know about that. I don't know if I had dreams of California in my mind already. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Growing up, I'm like, but so I got it. Everybody I got introduced there was a fantastic powerlifter. There was a guy at Workout Plus, and they, then I would go to every meet in town. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And Bob was good friends with Dom Sardo, who was a 1991 WPC world champion. He was the head strength coach of Harvard. I looked him up not recently. He's not too long ago. He's in law enforcement now, I think at Harvard University. He's like 5 years older than me. So, man, he's still in the fight. Good for him. But he was a 400-pound bencher and 600-pound on the bookends and, world champion. And so I would just seek out anybody that in the gym. I was specified stayed in that gym, but I would travel too to other gyms around there. I developed a training partner named Mark Gavoni, God rest his soul, because he passed from kidney issues a couple years ago. But he came in third in the 94 seniors in Illinois to Tom Waddle, but he ended up totaling over 2,000.
One of my earlier meets that I did when I was in high school before the round system existed. So it was round robin or whatever you want to call it at the time. The weights were loaded, mm-hmm. and you didn't have, I had to repeat myself.
You had to follow yourself.
I had to follow myself. And I did my opener squat, second attempt squat, third attempt squat, then Laura Dodd went. Right. So, and that was, I might have been a junior in high school at that time. It was the first time I ever met Louie. Right. Okay. He was there helping her at the time. And it wasn't like this huge exchange of, hey, how are you, that kind of stuff. He just helped me a little bit with my bench, in the warm-up room, and gave some words of encouragement. But after that, I had two thoughts going through my head. First off, this sucks, that I just got, she might have squatted 500 or 550 or something like that.
Strong.
And it's with single ply back then. We didn't really have any other choices that I know of that I was exposed to. I didn't know if Raw existed or maybe somebody was competing Raw, but it was because they didn't have a suit. And then I got her on the bench though. And then she got me on the deadlift. But after that, I was kind of hooked from the whole thing. But then I would see Louie at, meets preceding that, and he'd give tips and help and stuff like that. So it's where my relationship with him really first started. But he was just crazy, but and not even, maybe he was well known. Not that well known, but he did have a stable of lifters with Mariah and Laura Dodd, Doug Heath, and all these other guys back then. Dimmel, I didn't know of him per se, at that time, as it came through with that. But it's interesting that when you first started competing, was it a round robin for you as well, or did it change to the round system?
I remember it as the round system, mm-hmm. By the time I was competing in '86. It
was interesting because I competed several years with that, and there was a strategy that had to start to become developed because, say if it was Matt Dimmel, and I believe his 1,000-pound squat and even Waddington's 1,000-pound squat was done in those conditions. They had to follow themselves. They only had 3 minutes rest. So if you were squatting a number like 700 or 600 or a popular number, you always wanted to go 05, or you would bring in, there were times we would bring in other people from the group that we lifted with to really not even lift, just pay the entry fee, put the openers in, to put a buffer in, to be able to get more rest for the whole thing. So there were ways that we had to try to game the whole system. And I'm still a teenager at the time, so I'm not really good enough to place or do anything substantial with all that. But man, there's a lot of stories I can remember from crazy ass Jack Sedaris showering with cowboy boots on in the high school shower after the meet.
Blacks they need to make a movie about blacks.
Oh my God. Yeah, I spent some time training there as well. And so it's as you progress through with the powerlifting through school, when did you hit the national level?
In 1988, I figured it out. I was being born in April. I wasn't going to be able to make the teen nationals. It was going to miss it. So I went to what was called the U.S. Open. That's the first time I flew to compete. It was in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And it was administered by Spiro Shondakidis, who was I believe he was associated with the ADFPA.
How did you qualify? Was it a total?
Yeah, I had gotten a total. I had been doing them once I did that meet in October of 86, I did a meet or two every year thereafter until the first year I moved to California in 91, I didn't do a meet. So I did have to do qualification paperwork. It was called the U.S. Nationals. I flew down there with my best friend who I used to train with, and then he wasn't training with me because he was in a different school. Strong kid, good Rafi saying, shout out. But he's a judge now in Massachusetts. But we went down there and I was geared up. My goal was to total 1,400 before I turned 20. I was 19, and man, I got my ass kicked by Sean Colbeth. Mm-hmm. I tracked him down last year in that I posted because he's from New England, and then Greg Panora told me he had passed. Mm-hmm. But he squatted, we were both in the 242s. He squatted 600, I squatted 500, but his bench was 480 and mine was low threes. And I was trying to deadlift 600 officially before I turned 20 was my goal, and I missed it. I got a 560 or something. I think he pulled 600. He was just a beast. And he went on the next year to win the collegiate nationals. And then looking at open powerlifting and how I followed it, then I already had a slew of kids and sadly passed away a few years ago.
How did it work with ADFPA? Because I went the other route. So for reasons of not being drug free, and things were different back then as well. I mean, there was a time period kind of halfway, maybe 15 years later, where it got a little dicey with people trying to beat tests and stuff like that. But at that point in time, it was, I'm not going to compete in the ADFPA because I use, and it was just kind of like a moral code.
I agree.
You weren't totally that.
Yeah.
And so my route was, I needed an elite total, to get to the nationals, so it was fighting for whatever that 1860 or 1920 or whatever it was, in the 42s or 75s to be able to get there. But then once I got there, I got my ass smoked. So when you got to that national level, was it kind of that same type of thing where you had to work for that total? And then when you get there, it's like a whole nother level is exposed to you.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, I remember the old, the classification charts that used to be in PLUSA for both the ADFPA and the USPF, what's elite, master, class 1, all the way down to class 4. I would have had to total something to definitely qualify for that meet in 88. That was the first time I ever had to submit paperwork that I had totaled something in a previous.
So, in Ohio, the way it was kind of set up with the APF is I had to lift in class 2 and below meets until I had a class 1 total. To be able to lift more. And they were both in the same meet, but to lift in an open category, to be able to do that. So that was kind of my drive, going all the way up through. It was I don't want to compete in this class 2 and below shit. I want to be in this, class 1 or open division. Cause we had in Finley, where I was from, there was the Hall of Fame meet, which was kind of like a Y Nationals. It was an invite only type elite and above.
Sure. Yeah, Don Reinhold.
Yeah, that was oh my God, it was one of my first meets. I had a teen division, and I lifted in that. And then I watched the open division, and John Black was lifting, Matt Demmel, Vincenello, Louis Simmons. I mean, I'm watching all these people lift weights, and I'm like, oh my God, I want to lift those weights, but I want to compete at that level, and it was harder to get there than what I first perceived, oh yeah, it was going to be. And then when I finally got there, I was like, oh shit, I'm right back. Because I'm winning best lifter awards in the class 2 and below meet. Then you get into the open and all of a sudden you're like, man, I'm 8th, 9th, I'm not even placing in my class and then working up through the ranks. So I had a couple of lifters later that I trained with that lifted in the ADFPA and beat the test, and there was one meet that I trained with them for and did not know it was an ADF meet, ADFPA meet. So I get there and then I realize, and I tell them, interesting enough, I have a conversation with the guys afterwards where they said, just put a tack in your shoe because it was a lie detector, and then just push your foot down and you're going to basically miss every question. So you'll be, I'm like, I'm not going to do that, but I still want to compete. So I basically just explained to the meet director, look, I didn't know what this was. And he arranged it so I could be a guest lifter, and it all worked out just fine. But that's when I first was exposed to, there's some people that are like screwing the system, with that whole thing, where meanwhile I trained with them this whole time. And then afterwards it's like, why don't you guys just compete over here? Yeah. They still would have won. I mean, the totals were that good, with that, but the world records and all the other kind of stuff. I'm getting kind of in some of the history, of the sport as it kind of progressed there. But it's interesting because you were on that side. So when you were on that side, did you see that same type of stuff where you knew that there were people that were beating the test?
Not beating. I think my last year in Massachusetts, I moved in 91 to California. I graduated college. My last year there, I trained with a guy at the gym, and I smile when I think of him because I like him, but I knew he was using stuff, and he had told me. And then sometimes you get to a meet and you're like, oh, he's there. I'm like, and I know he was tested, and I don't know what happened because then I moved. You don't keep up with that. But I'm like, man, I don't agree with that at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of,
it's crummy.
It seemed to be a very small minority of people that were doing that because it was pretty honest, about that whole thing with that. Then I don't know what happened with it later because then, it changed from ADFPA to USAPL, I believe, right?
Yeah. I ended up competing later in the USAPL in Arizona when I came back from cleaning out, if you will.
Yeah. Okay. I think that split was the USPF continued, right?
Yeah, it's still on fumes. It's like they have occasionally a meet in Tucson, and I had done a few of those, like Sherry Hartman and Danny Eldridge, and then it's like there's meets in Arizona because they're out there in Sierra Vista, southern Arizona of Tucson, and then Oklahoma, and there's a few. It's barely surviving, if you will, to be honest, USPF, but it still exists.
What are your thoughts on, because you were around during that time, is we have 1 million federations now, right? But I remember when there was only basically just one, and that wasn't good either, and even when there was, at least when it kind of split, there was competition, so the ADFPA was competing for lifters against the APF, and the USPF, I think, became the ADFPA, if I remember. Something kind of happened.
People cleaved off.
Yeah, that's kind of how that happened. And so it was, and that there wasn't, I think people, what's the word I'm looking for, romanticize having just one federation, but haven't been through a time period to where something was kind of like that. So what are your thoughts on that? Granted, I don't think 800 federations is a good thing either.
No, I think it's good folks can have a choice, if you will. I mean, I did it when I came up, it was just single ply, right? When I started. So, but of course you were taught, like, add your squat suit like 12 weeks out with the straps down, or, and so forth. You would add supportive gear as need be as the 12-week cycle went along. So raw didn't exist. It was unheard of. And then, but yeah, by as I fell in love with powerlifting, there were other options, if you will, but it was all gear. It was when there was 3 federations and when there was 20, Raw was really unheard of. I mean, thank you for checking out this episode of Under the Bar. If you want to hear more stories from me and who I attribute my success to in the powerlifting sport, check out Built by History on Amazon. It's a book I sell. Appreciate it. Thank you. Occasionally you would see a guy lift raw. When I was at York in 99, I think their last name was Hickey. That like some guy bench like 660 from New York, like Adirondack. I was like, oh my, that was unheard of. And then we had a guy in Southern California named Ron Fedke who was super strong, and below 198, he would bench 520 raw. Like that was kind of unheard of. But we, at the same time, our goal was always to be as strong raw as we could in the gym. It was for a lot of guys, I think for a lot of guys like me that came from football, were like, putting on supportive gears, like strapping on the pads, like it just, you can hit harder.
Now in PLUSA, there was the top 100, but did the ADFPA have a separate list that was published?
For a period of time they did, Dave, but it was a top 20.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had that.
I don't know how they did the masters and the teens and the women's was like that.
Well, the masters, teens, and women's would be a separate issue, and they do top 50, I believe. Maybe it was top 20, but they got their due.
Okay.
You know, when you look through the old issues, you know, Mike Lamb did a masterful job of giving everybody a chance to be highlighted if you competed. You know?
Yeah, to me, that was always the ultimate goal, is moving up that list. You know, you had to wait a year, right? So it's fine. It's funny because things have evolved so much. I can remember training in, it was a squat day, and the Hawaii record breakers were going on, and somebody had called the gym, you know, old phones back.
Sure.
And they were calling, and somebody squatted, maybe Anthony Clark or somebody squatted a world record on the telephone and hang up. And so they kind of give us the news and said, yeah, but it was high as hell. You know, so it's like this, you know, the squats being high, you know, it goes back to all the way then. And then you would wait for PLUSA to come out and you'd see the photo and be like, yeah, there it was high. And you have no idea where the photo was actually taken from. You know, so that the high squat thing just keeps going way back from there. So when did you make your way to California?
So in 1990, take you back 1 second. Like I was, that was considered, it was my 4th year of college, but you're only considered a junior because it's a 5-year school. So I went to the Collegiate Nationals in Virginia Tech, and I came in 3rd, and I set the national collegiate and American record in the deadlift. I hit 650. I was 232 body weight, 235. So in the 242. So I was like, all right, I did that. 2 weeks, about a month before that, I had won the USPF Region 1s. The same day, it was February 10th, the same day Buster Douglas knocked out Mike Tyson. Mm-hmm. So I remember I lifted that morning, and we were drinking and watching in the bar. I go, oh my God, like he's an Ohio boy, right? That's motivated. His mom died and all. It was a great story. So then I did that, and I'm like, okay, next year I graduate, I'm going to get into law enforcement. And I was a good sized guy, but you know, law enforcement academies, you knew there was going to be cardio. So I'm like, ugh. But like, so I was training that summer after the Collegiate Nationals, because when we got back for the Nationals, you used the phrase blast or dust. Man, I partied hard for like we drank and celebrated. Like me and like my good friend was Jim did 683, 446, 683. He was the collegiate super heavyweight champ. So I wasn't on campus that semester. I was at work, but we partied. We partied and celebrated that whole month and had a good time, right? And then I started getting training, and then Jim's like, man, I'm hurt. I'm like, well, the ADFPA, the men's senior nationals, is men's Massachusetts states, because I won the Region 1s as a junior. Then I came in 3rd of the collegiates, but I'd never been Massachusetts men's champion, right? So I wanted that bad, but Jim's like, man, I'm hurt, my back, I'm burned out. He goes, you got to do it. I'm like, all right, well, I'm 230. So I gained 60 pounds in 6 months. It was like, have you ever seen that Simpsons when he goes to weigh in to get over 300 to be disabled, but the fat's hanging off the towel rack, and he pulls it, and the scale goes to 305.
Yeah.
I got so fat so quick. And I mean, I won the states December 1st, and I'm like, man, this is nasty. I got to get in shape. So then I just started like starving myself to get ready to go to California, because I'd been graduating in June and get out there for.
So when you did meets back then, just from a training perspective, I would take like a month off training completely after the meet, then start training again. Is that kind of the same route that you would do? Because it's when I talked to people that were training back then, it was kind of all linear periodization. It was kind of we're just taking whatever's in PLUSA.
Yeah.
So in converting the numbers to our percentages and kind of going through there. But there was always that stop, after a meet where I was always taught just take a month off and not do anything. And you were saying that you partied hard for a month, which is when we think was that month off time period, and was that like a normal thing?
Yeah, mentally, I always felt like I felt every meet success, which I was, in my mind, for me, I was successful. Every year in college, my total went up 100 pounds, and I didn't considerably add a lot of weight. I had been a 75er in 89, and then I'm like, man, I lost a little weight, and I was working a lot, and so I went back to 42s to go to the collegiate nationals. I'd feel I'd be most competitive. But I would never take that much time off the gym because I loved it. What it was what you referenced there. I'll say this: you hear, I listen to a lot of media and tangentially to powerlifting, you hear bodybuilding things. And I lived in California, and people might criticize Weider and say what you will, but the fact that if you look at like Muscle Fitness back then had Fred Hatfield as a writer, and I fast forward like a little bit when I eventually met him, because you remember then he was at his peak. And even a few years later, when I'd read Louis was like, listen to Hatfield, Elite in 5. Like, I'll say this, when I met Hatfield in 93. So in 86, he squatted 1047 and it was ruled high, but he still did 1014. And he was like 47 years old on rebuilt rotator cuffs and a single ply bench to 523. And he dropped a 793 deadlift. So I'm like, I followed his programming a lot. Like you go into the gym, right? And the experienced powerlifters is like, well, everything goes from 8s to 5s to triples. Yeah. And I'd read everything I can get my hands on. But for me, I would do a lot of Hatfield stuff. He announced that Russian peak program back then, which was you build up to 6, it's like a 6-week program. So you do 6 sets of 2 at 80% on your light day. And then you build up over the course of 3 weeks to 6 sets of 6 with 80%, 5 sets of 5 at 85%, 4 sets of 4 at 90%. It's pretty good science, and I knew nothing of Perlipin's chart or anything of Louis' writings back then, but I followed Hatfield. And then what I had was, we all used it. The guys I worked out with, Bill Kazmaier was God, right? And we had his muscle building program from Crane's Muscle World, how to build muscle. Yeah. We do that like sets of 10. It's got cycles in it. Stan, I love I love the power lift. Don't get me wrong, but I love, standing dumbbell presses. I was still like, okay, I'm going to build myself to be the biggest unit I can. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it seems to be a similar path that we kind of all of our taken is there would be a little bit of time off after the meet, then you kind of go into a bodybuilding phase.
Yes.
And then when that next 12 weeks would start, you'd go right back into that whole peaking program and rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And that was kind of my evolution as well until going to Westside and meeting Louis, then everything got turned on its head. But how long did that type of training work for you because for me, I remember distinctly, it was around a 19, 20 total. And for 3 or 4 years, it didn't matter what the hell I did. I'm trying everything, Russian programs, crazy shit that I would find in the Soviet Sport Review. Nothing made any difference. And I had professors telling me I hit my genetic limit and all this other kind of crap, and my body's just getting torn all apart. And then it leads to a pec tear and conversation with Louis. And that was my pivot away from that because I kind of capped out on that style of training. And did you experience that same type of thing?
100%. So I had a great training environment in Massachusetts. Then I graduated. And one of the reasons I got a degree in criminal justice, I graduated, believe it or not, with honors, which is good for me. I had to work for that. But at the same time, the world events, the Gulf War happened. I'm like, man, like the way Massachusetts works, I'm like, man, those guys are all going to get veterans points ahead of me on civil service tests. And in Massachusetts, they want you to be a little older before you're a police officer. And I was 23. I'm like, man, I'm ready to go. And I wasn't willing to bartend or personal train and my buddy, one of the guys I went to college with was already in California. He goes, man, they love us out here. They hire you in a second. Like he was in the academy anyways. He's like, fly out, live with me. And so I did that once I graduated. And I'm getting away from the story a little bit. So I lose all that weight. I get hired. I go through the academy. And I thought, okay, this is going to becoming a federal agent. So I was hired by the Department of Justice Office of Inspector General. I did the Outstanding Scholar Program, which it was I was good. This is a good deal. You know, I was impressed with it. My family was. They were proud. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. And then like 2 years into it, like 92, 90, by 93, I'm like, man, this doesn't fill the hole, man. I like that movie with Rocky. He's like, I still got something in the basement. I'm like 24 years old. And at first, California, the traffic and work was my focus, but I'm like, man, I hadn't found any power lifters yet. I'm like, man, this isn't what it's about, right? I want to find that, right? So I was, so I walked in, I lived in an area I worked up in Glendale, and no good gyms up there. There's no, you know, you're trying to figure out, there's no internet back then. So you're like, where's the good gyms? You look in the phone book. Samson's, which had been a legend in the 80s.
Yeah.
Terry McCormick and Kaz and stuff. That was on Fumes, and that was in Orange County. I was in Downey. So fortunately for me being in Downey, I'm like, okay, yeah, it's kind of near where my wife grew up, and it's like kind of in between her life and mine, because we lived together at that point. We were married. But I walk into a gym called American Eagle in like 1993. I'm like, man, I walk in, who's right there? Like, it's C.T. Fletcher and Rich Schoenberger. Like, it's bench night, and they're benching 600. I'm like,
you found it.
Yeah, I'm like, this is neat. You know what I'm saying? This is really cool. Really cool. So God rest Rich. Rich passed away the night before I announced powerlifting in July last year. But I mean, Rich was a rocket scientist, literally. He's an aerospace industry, huge out there, you know, and he's if you've never had the honor, Rich was, but you know the type. I mean, Rich was literally a Coke machine. He was like that locker over there. He was 6 feet by 6 feet, benching 600. I believe him to be natural. Never had that conversation, but I believe him. He was just enormous, man, you know, and CT is CT, you know, and I got to see him at the Arnold this year and reconnect, but, and I connected before, but, you know, just to see like CT was, I was like, you know, look, just his arms are amazing when you first see him in person. They're ginormous. But so I trained there at American Eagle, and there were some powerlifters. Now those guys, I wasn't strong enough to bench with them, but Rich programmed my bench, gave me some ideas, but I still was lost in 93. So then by Christmas of 93, I'm like, man, I'd been to a meet. The first time I did a meet after leaving Massachusetts was the Venice Beach deadlift. So it's cool that we used to be able to compete down there. You know what I'm saying? We know that you and I grew up with that Venice Beach was the deal. So I get there and I did it, and it was run by Steve Dennison, was the USPF state chairman. And I competed there, and I only did like 660. That's only 10 pounds more than my collegiate record. And I'm like, man, my training, this isn't happening. Then reading Powerlifting USA, I found the Westside tapes. And I mean, the original Westside tapes, the bench secrets, I got them for Christmas that year, and I studied them. And so I got them in Christmas in 93. Then I moved. I moved out, and I started living with my buddies then. And I was living up in the San Fernando Valley, which wasn't the best situation for training either. I mean, back in the day, that's where Hatfield was from. There was not that many powerlifters. I was up in the north corner in Chatsworth. So I trained at Powerhouse Gym in Chatsworth. I digested those tapes, and I couldn't get over 400 in the bench.
What did you think after you first saw them?
You know, in a lot of ways, it spoke to me in that, like, I was still focusing on my career. What I liked about it, Dave, to be honest, was like there were a lot of options you could do without spotters, because I didn't have a crew then. You know, and you couldn't. I hated counting on people. You're like, you see a guy at the gym, like, oh, I hope he's there when I'm squatting, and then you're like, he's not. Like, I hadn't built relationships, and that Powerhouse Gym was not a typical Globo gym, but it didn't have, you know, it had people to spot you on the bench, but it was just okay. So, but the Westside tapes, they spoke to me. I'm like, man, yeah, that was kind of like, I was at the point where I've been training hard for about 7 years, but like to watch Louis break down correct squat form with Chuck Vogelpool, and then how to position your knees and box squat. And I'm like, this is it. This is going to help me, you know, and the idea of focusing on weaknesses. And as soon as a lot of people, men too, especially, a pig-headed, man, I'm strong. But you could get stronger if you learn correct technique and a new way of thinking. And then I embraced those tapes wholeheartedly. And I just dove right into them. Fortunately, where I worked, the guy who I worked for at the time, the boss of the office, had a big 1,000 square foot office, and he had like kind of a midlife crisis. He bought 700 pounds of weights. He would ask me, I'm going to do a powerlifting meet. I'm like, okay. He bought good equipment there for the office. So I was the youngest agent still by far in the office. So like those guys, you'd hear them like old guy problems, like, oh, I got to go by Home Depot and buy a sprocket today. This is leaking in the house. And so they wanted to work and then get gone. So the office was usually closed out at 5 o'clock. So they'd go and I'd have a snack. And then I was doing those West Side workouts by myself, but I kept getting stronger. You know, like I rigged up, I took an old Olympic lifting belt, cut it and made a belt to do reverse hypers off the safes there. And I'm like, man, that makes my back feel good. Cause if, you know, we met earlier, you stood up, I'm all back, you know, I had like 30-inch legs when I wear pants and I was 6'2", you know? So those exercises, even the kneeling squats and the Zercher stuff you could do by yourself. And that was revolutionary for me. So I trained hard as I could. Well, I'm training hard. And then right around the day that the OJ chase, my dad was not in the best of health. He was in the hospital. He had serious health issue. My sister's a nurse. She called. She goes, better get back here. This doesn't look good. So I went back there. My dad had surgery, a back surgery in '88 because he had kyphosis. He had rods in his back. So when they went they were going to do his gallbladder in '94. He really wasn't. My dad wasn't a real healthy guy. He was a hard worker, but he almost died and they had to give him blood. I'll get back to that later. So they gave him blood in '94 and he made it, but, and we were there and then I stayed for a few weeks and then training was on the back burner. But then I was like, it just hit me. I'm like, man, I got goals I got to get, you know, when you see your parents' mortality, you know, well, the blood they gave him in '94 killed him in '98, hepatitis. We didn't know that until after the fact. So dirty blood is medical malpractice, killed my dad. So, but not knowing that, he recovered and went back to work. He worked for the post office. He was a mailman his whole career, and retired successfully and then died 6 months later. Sad. And then after the fact, we got a notice like, why did he die? And then we got a notice, oh yeah, he got tainted blood.
Yeah. My impression of West Side at that time, because I was tighter with Matt Dimmel than I was Louis, say in '91, you know, so I would go up to train with Matt and he would help with the technique. The technique was huge. You know, the box squats were huge. But then I would go back to college and train there, and all those other exercises, I'm like, those are stupid as fuck. I'm not going to do those. You know, and the training didn't make sense. You know, the speed work didn't make sense. None of that made sense to me whatsoever. So there was like maybe a 1.5 year period kind of going back and forth. The technique was making a big difference, but the training it did not click with me because it was went against everything that I'd learned. And then everything I learned in college as well, and even through the Soviet stuff that I learned until I went back and looked later, you know, with a little bit different eye. And it wasn't, then after I tore my pec, to me, I was done, you know, because it was probably 12 years competing at that point in time. And there was a conversation with Louis, you know, basically explaining all this stuff and trying to get me to understand, you know, speed work and all this other kind of stuff. And the only thing that he said something at some point in time, like, are you really comfortable with leaving the sport, but not knowing if this would work for you? And in my head, I couldn't leave and ask, what if? You know, I didn't want to be like 10 years down later and say, well, what if I did try that? So then that was the decision that, yeah, I'll move, you know, for that. And then even the first year we were butting heads a lot, you know, because I was training in the afternoon crew and still kind of sneaking in the progressive overload and not really making any progress until I was on the cusp of being thrown out and basically just told him, here's what I'll do. I'll change my work schedule. I'll change my job, basically. Then I'll train in the morning. And then that way, if this doesn't work, it's on you. It's not me. And then my total went up 250 pounds in the next year. So, and then it's like, where are these? And I'd never seen the tapes. I didn't even really know they even existed, the first round of tapes. And then with some probing, you know, he gave me the Russian manuals and all the other stuff, and I'm looking through there. Then it all started to make sense. I'm like, I get this. I get where it's coming from. And now when you're in that environment, those exercises, you're doing them because that's what everybody else is doing, you know. So like the searchers, I still didn't like doing those at all, you know. And the kneeling squats, that's an interesting one because we used them a lot and they helped, but it got to a point where it was just, I remember Joe Amato and myself, and we were in the night crew at the time, and there was, Gabe Ryder or somebody else was with us. And we did like 900 for 8 reps. And it was like, what is this doing for us? Our squats are like 760 or 780. Like this is, Louis came in. He usually didn't come at night, but he came in. We're like, I'm trying to tell him this is a waste of time. Like if I can do these, like, what do I need? Like fucking 1,100 pounds, and it's not doing shit, but everybody's structure's different. It's kind of like a good morning, it took a while for that to evolve. But with the reverse hyper, I do remember when I was driving up before moving there, it was a bench, and we had a belt with a strap on it. And I wasn't allowed to tell anybody what we were doing because he was patenting the machine at the time, and it helped. I mean, it definitely helped.
Sure.
The problem was I couldn't replicate it very well when I would go back home, to come back. And then by the time I got back, he had the first one that bolted, down to the ground, and it became something that I will never do again the rest of my life because I did so many of them that it's like there's 2 of them in here and I will not get on it, because when you're doing them 16 times a week, sometimes it's like, no, that's enough for that whole thing. But it's interesting to hear other people's perspective, on that whole thing, because we had no idea that he was selling a boatload of tapes and that other people were even doing this. And we're in our little bubble in a 400 square foot gym in Columbus, Ohio. And the only time you ever saw anybody is if you went to a meet. There's no Instagram. There's, none of this kind of stuff. So you go to a meet and you talk to people and they're doing the same thing. And then you start to realize something's going on. Something's happening here with all this kind of stuff. And the evolution of the time that I was in there, of all the different things that kind of came and went, was interesting to document. I have an article somewhere where it was like 100 things that I saw come to Westlake, like the bands and the chains stuff.
Sure.
People don't understand that for so many years. We didn't have a monolift when I first got there. We didn't have chains. We didn't, so people ask, when should I start using chains? I'm like, well, if you really want to replicate what we did at that time, you would not use them for 4 years. Then you would introduce them for about 1.5 years. But then the bands got introduced. Then you would go to the bands. Then you would overuse the band tension to the point of pretty much breaking everybody into the gym. And then you would mitigate it back down to what's optimal. But it helped because when we'd see other people, or Louis would see it, he would never listen to us. We'd have to find creative ways to like funnel ideas to him. But if somebody else, say if you were to meet and you were talking to him and you say you were doing this, or this, or this, he would take your ideas and then bring it back to our gym. But if we were in the gym and we're like, hey, we should try to do this, shut the hell up. That's not going to work. So we would have to like funnel the idea to you to be able to funnel it back, to be able to circle back around. So it helped evolve, because all those people were doing that. And they would call him. He would freely talk to anybody on the phone all day long, through that whole time period. As you were doing, say, just the speed work, for instance, in the gyms that you're in, people are looking at you like, what the hell are you doing?
A little bit. Again, I found one guy to start training with me in '94. He's a good kid, Danny. I don't know where he is today, but he wasn't really a powerlifter, but he's a good spirited kid. Always there. And I think he saw, like, because I couldn't, the first thing that worked for me, Dave, was definitely the speed work in the bank. I couldn't get over 400. And then doing the speed work, I did it religiously, and their max effort exercise. Then I broke the 400-pound barrier. I go, man, this is it. There's definitely something to this. Then as that year progressed, as 94 progressed, once I got back from my dad's illness, it was game on. I was really committed to following everything I could. So I did. I started training more at my office at that setup with just limited equipment, but just like doing the speeds, like I used to call the speed squat night, and I do it by myself at first, 10 minutes of terror. It literally, when you're doing 12 doubles, and that's when I started, and I appreciate the gift bag when I came in the logbook. It's beautiful. Thank you, sir. I kept my records through college, and then I have those, and then I stopped. But in '93, when I started Westside, I kept the records, right? Mm-hmm. And my notes would be like, all right, did 12 doubles and have a drink on me and Hell's Bells.
Yeah.
It's like when I hear AC/DC, I still picture that bar on my back.
Yeah.
And like you try to do it and race the clock. And it was absolutely murderous. And like I found out later, because then I became friends with Bob Youngs, God rest his soul, he would tell me. And then I would even, maybe Louis talked about, but I'd finish those 12 to 10 speed doubles. And man, I would lay out for a little bit. And even when I was by myself, I would hammer them and chase the clock. And how effective that was. It stripped fat off me, put me in shape, and it's like banging your head against the wall. When you stop, of course, just sitting here feels fine. Like, oh, what do I got to go for a heavy single one day? Like, that was brutal, but it was just what I needed.
Yeah.
And with my build, it was just a standard. We had a regular Texas power bar. I had access to it at my boss's work. It was, I can remember starting cycles with like the 50, 55, and 50. I started them light, like 225, 275. I pounded the work. And what got to me, like by that time, like again, traditional linear periodization or Western periodization, I'd gotten stagnated by just building up to a max, building up. And I'm like, it spoke to me that it made sense to do more work. Like what in the world isn't doing more work going to help you do? You know, like having, in my background, I hadn't spoken about it before, but not only did I play football, I was fortunate to study American-style Taekwondo at a real badass place in Massachusetts for my senior year of high school and my first year in college, called One Step Beyond, with like real fighters and stuff. And there was no MMA back then, but this guy, American-style Taekwondo, it's no joke. We sparred and fought all the time, but look how much work we did. And I was super flexible. I mean, I'd be up against the wall and they'd have my foot here. Like what Hatfield later coined as PNF stretching. We were doing it back then. So I had that base that really helped me build a fitness base, but we did tons of work. So when I saw the West Side tapes, I'm like, it hit me like, dummy, you can't always just work up heavy. You got to do more work, right? And everything Louis said made sense. I had read, Louis, I think, was first published in PL USA in 88 on percent training. What is it? There was a picture of Debbie Sorensen there. I remember all this stuff. Like I've read it 1,000 times. I still have them. And then there was a box squat article with Jeff Chorpening in it, like showing the different levels you did. And I'm like, that makes sense too, you know. And I went out and bought a hassock. Let's make it like running in sand, make it harder, make your training harder. That spoke to me much like maybe that fight training I had, if you will, because I didn't competitively fight, but we sparred every session. I'm like, you know, a fighter doesn't go do a 12-round brawl every day and expect to get better. Like, you got to have some speed into that. When you remember back at this time, you'd see Tyson work a heavy bag. You're like, yeah, that's frightening. It's like the Tasmanian devil with dynamite. You know, like, wow, there's got to be something as an athlete. And when you're doing traditional periodization, you start getting lazier and away from like, oh, I missed it. You know, and not to say there wasn't good information out there again too prior to that, like Hatfield Info and Kazmaier's muscle building program was a fantastic booklet. You know, it's like work for speed and exhaustion, and you look at his.
Yeah, I don't think I really understood Hatfield's compensatory acceleration training until I started doing the actual speed work. Then, because for me, the speed work that worked better for me than any of the max effort work by far. You know, and it was brutal, but you know, you get accustomed to it, and it was back to back, you know. So I mean, my training sessions, we were in and out of the gym within 45 minutes, and that's everything. So we didn't have the time to lay down after the squats because it just wasn't the way it was, you know. It was kind of moving all through that whole thing. But that's when I was sold on it. Like after the first training cycle, and squat went up 100, I mean, it went up a lot, like 60, 80 pounds or something like that. And then another question for you is, because I was used to training the same way that you were talking about. You start 12 weeks out, maybe it's just briefs or suit straps down, then you add the wraps 4 weeks out, but you'd have at least 4 or 5 weeks with full gear, you know, kind of going into the meet. I get to West Side, there's no gear. There's none at all, you know, so max effort day, just about nothing. And later on dynamic day, we were allowed briefs, was just it. The only time we wore gear was in the meet. That was it. Wraps, only time in the meet. And I remember, because you get accustomed to using wraps when you're using them, you know, training for meets all the time. But when you don't use them at all, then you go to a meet and you have somebody just jacking the wraps on you. You remember real quick how you were used to it, but now you're not, you know, because it hurt like a bitch to be able to do that. So as you were doing this training, was it the same type to where you're not using the gear until the actual meet? because I put this out there because one of the false assumptions people make about the time, well, at least that I was at Westside, is that it was all gear training. And it's like, dude, we didn't wear the gear at all. You know, I didn't put my canvas suit on. I didn't put a bench shirt on until the meet. Maybe you put it on when you first got it to make sure it fit. But then if you put it on in the gym, the razzing and the shit that you would beer was just, you know, off the hook. And, you know, Louis like, you need to be strong, you know, strong. You know, the gear is just going to be the aid once you get to the meet. Later on, as gear advanced, you know, that's when there started to become rifts in the gym, because now we're getting beat by people we know are stronger than by a lot.
Yeah, that certainly happened in the bench. You know, like,
and the bench, well, yeah, the squat as well, when the canvas kind of started to come in and you see people squatting 200 pounds more, and you're like, what the hell? Like, why are we not learning the gear? And it was a battle that kind of ensued in the gym, which one of the reasons why Chuck started training someplace else for a while was to get used to the gear, because he was sick and tired of going to a meet and getting out squatted by people he knew he was stronger than. But that was kind of Louis' thing at that time, is you didn't use the gear, you had to be strong, you know, and it migrated, you know, more so after I left than when I was in there. The only regret, I guess, that's a terrible word, I don't have regret is the word. I wish there would have been more time in the gear to be able to learn how to use it instead of just throwing the shit on at the meet. Did you have that same?
Yeah, to look back in retrospect, sure. Like I I was training to become a stronger human being. So I ended up, when you look at open powerlifting has it right. Like my best lifts ended up being 2,094, and I did those all at a national meet, but not together. My best total is 2,000. So 810 squat, which is, I mean, I did a 740 box squat. So I stood up with 859 and got 2 reds on it at the nationals. But to answer your question, to look back, I was not gear dependent. Yeah. And I bristle when people, and then I don't bristle at anything really too much anymore, because his ignorance is bliss. Like, but I knew how strong I was. So when I started Westside, I just had a belt, and I do the speed squat work with nothing on, right? Not, you know, clothes, but shorts and a t-shirt, but no belt. And then I would do, I gravitated towards the speed deadlift workout immediately. I love that. The 65% for 15 singles, 70% for 12 singles. After having get stagnated mid sixes, that coupled with box squats, building my hips and my hamstrings and my stomach, and I was a better shape athlete.
Yeah, actually, you just reminded me that the trick to part of not falling down after the speed squats is we would freeload what the speed pulls were going to be. So you went from your last set of squats straight into the speed pulls. Then that was kind of like you're cooling down before you went on to the other things.
Yeah. So what I did, that I remember it now that you mentioned it specifically. So I'm by myself in 94 and I'm training, but I have a bench press, a kid that helps me in the bench press again. So he helped me. I didn't do a lot of work in my shirt. I was over 400 raw then, and I felt good with it. I just had an Inzer single ply was my bench shirt I had ordered, and it was using. So I didn't use hardly any gear. What I did was, like, I had that old article by Louis on box squatting with Jeff Chorpinning. They would hit different levels. So I figured to myself, okay, I trained by myself. If I can box squat, let's say in this case, I think my goal was to squat like 450 to a 12-inch or 425 to the hassock, just with a belt. And I didn't wear briefs for a few years. I didn't get into briefs, I think, till 96. I got my first briefs. So I'm like, okay, and then I'll go to the meet. I'll put the suit on, wraps. I used to always, to this day, I've never had anyone wrap my knees. I mean, I've always wrapped them myself. And where we train, we always wrapped ourselves. Josh, we'd wrap ourselves. It is what it is, but not as tight as they could have been, I guess. But anyway, so the first chance I got to test out the Westside was the week before Thanksgiving, 94. So I went up there, having trained and having cycled on Westside programs. I was drug-free. I went to, it was the USPF military nationals, but civilians could enter it at Vandenberg Air Force Base. So I went there and I ended up coming in third. And it was my first 1,700-pound total. I went 633, I got over 4, maybe 407 in the bench. and a 677 deadlift. My deadlift was really good, and I weighed about 259. I'm like, okay, this is it, right? And then, so like you talked about before, I was like, man, and I was training at a gym. These guys, I don't believe it, and then like, man, this. Half the guys like, man, he's onto something. I'm like, it's game on, man. And so then like, you take a few weeks to, if you will, find yourself. So at the time, I'm not living with my girlfriend's not living with me. So she's like 40 miles away. So my schedule's more open. So I go visit her, and I'm visiting her I'm coming home up to the valley, and I'm like, man, let me go to Hollywood, because Hollywood has a newsstand open 24/7. Had all magazines. You could read European bodybuilding magazines and all this stuff. But that's the Powerlifting USA. They came out with John Cole on the cover, because I was always kind of knew who he was, but and at the time he was in his early 50s coming back, and I was looking at this. I'm like, man, that guy. To me, the greatest strength athlete who's ever lived, not to get off a tangent, but it was like that coupled with doing the West Side, I go, now I know it works. Because then you start reading about Cole. He was a high-level track athlete. He did Olympic lifting just because it was in the Olympics. He couldn't even stand it, but he did conjugate. He'd be like, well, I'll do upright rows with 4 or 5 because I hate the cleans. And it all kind of came together to me. I'm like, man, and I felt I had momentum. I was good. I was happy. I was making money. And that's leading up to that tape you played earlier. The 95 Cal States, man, that's going to be game on. It's going to be a chance for me to go improve and build my total. So starting in 94, when I started Westside, my best total going into that had been 1615. Then I told 16. Then I told 1700 at the end of 94. So then I'm like, okay, all right, these guys are probably using steroids. I'm a grown man. I make money. I don't want to lose my job. California was ahead of the curve in a lot of ways. I don't want to call it earthy, crunchy newsletter. Like I was reading it, there's a hormone guy you could go see. I'm like, wait a minute, let me go see that. And that's the first time I met a doctor who I went, said what I wanted to do. He took my blood. I'd never had my testosterone levels measured up to that point. I don't know what they were. He goes, well, legally, we got to take your hormones. Mm-hmm. This is 95. We got to take your levels, and then I can proceed. I can prescribe accordingly. So he did, and he prescribed. He would give me 200 milligram testosterone. He would preload syringes 8 at a time for 8 weeks. And it was like, went through my insurance, and that's what I started on. So I started on that, and man, I was like, this is great. And it coincides. I had read Dan Duchesne at the same time, not to be a plug for it, but at the same time, I had been not pure as a driven snow, but I'm not going to use anything. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, they introduced Ultimate Orange, which was, Dan Duchesne's company. I'd never taken it. I wasn't a coffee drinker. Now I'm caffeine addled. So, yeah. But oh my goodness, like there was, other than in college when they introduced Jolt Cola, I'm like, that's too much sugar.
Yeah.
There was no energy drinks back then. There was and I worked in GNC twice. I didn't take.
So no ephedrine?
About the time Ultimate Orange, ephedrine, too, yeah. Right. Oh, yeah. I'm like, Dimethadrine 25, because I would subscribe to all the magazines, like Muscle Media 2000, and I'd read everything I could get my hands on. I'm like, okay, I'll try this, and I was very, it was a time where that stuff all hit.
Yeah, we get the little mini thins. It's
25 milligrams. Yeah. They had something with another compound in there with G. Golf. I don't know what that did, but it all worked.
Yeah.
I mean, so somebody ruined the party.
Oh yeah, somebody definitely ruined the party, but it made the speed work a lot better.
Oh my goodness, guy. 2 scoops of Ultimate Orange that was like, I was training at night, except I've always done this, Dave, if I could. I was fortunate in being law enforcement. I didn't have shift work, federal agents, 90%, 95% of the time I was off Saturday and Sunday. So I'd never understand to this day, unless work or, if your priority is to compete, these people that don't train Saturday morning when the meet, or squat Saturday morning when the meets, later on when I was into my career and family, like I just changed it to Sundays when I came back to do USAPL meets, but you still had to get used to training in the morning. I see it to this day when I announce meets. People are like, I didn't feel quite good. Well, when do you lift? Well, I usually lift at 5 o'clock. Well, why did you think you'd squat good at 10 a.m. if you makes sense? But so no, Saturday morning, get up. I used to do the dishes because I hated it. It makes me angry. I don't know why I stand doing it, but it kept my hands soft, right? But I would take 2 scoops of Ultimate Orange. And by the time, this is just me and we got married by that point, but like by the time I finished with like 10 dishes, I was like, ooh, sweating, you're ready. And it was about 20 minutes to my gym back then was a gym called Uptown Gym, which was kind of internet famous, or not internet, but famous because that's where Rory Liedermeyer had trained Tony Mandarich. and it was in Sports Illustrated, and it'd been closed once. It was closed in '90 for drug seizures, but it was what it was. But it was reopened. It was a great gym, so I was going back there. It had nothing to do with Rory or Tony, but that was my gym. It was about 20 minutes. You get about 3 or 4 songs in, and the ultimate orange kicks in with the oatmeal and some whey protein scooped over it, and some liver tablets, and man, it's game on. It was 3 hours of let's go, let's train. That was max effort lower body.
Rory was jacked, man. There's IFBB pro.
Yeah, like he's my friend, and I haven't seen him since I went back to celebrate his birthday years back, and that I ran into him at the gym. He's like, oh, he looks amazing. But yeah, so when I first moved to California, I lived across the street with my roommate. He was going to LA County Sheriff's. There was a gym across the street from there called Iron Racks that had opened because Uptown had been seized and closed by the government for drug sales. So I walked in, and that's the first time I've seen a human like that. Like Roy was like, he's on his comeback. He was like 330. Like I'd never seen tissue like that. I was like, and I'd seen some humans. I'm like, oh my, he's super nice. He was like late 30s, but he was coming back and has made his comeback. But I've seen Roy knock off alternate dumbbell curls with hundreds like butter. I didn't see it then, but people I trust and know, no, Roy benched 600 raw. And I believe it. No, I his frame. Yeah. You know, like, and there's not anybody that's ever said differently, like that his strength was, I mean, yeah, it was the first time I'd ever seen a human like that. I'm like, oh my goodness. Like I had seen never, like to this day, I'm like, man, never. Cause I always hit him up like, man, you got to find some pictures of when you were off season. Cause then there's famous pictures when he came back a couple years after that, he was in bodybuilding shape, but I mean, the tissue like hanging off him. And I'm like, he was just like, how you doing? I'm like, good. So like, you know, when you first see that, you're your first kid, and I, growing up reading all Powerlifting USA's, I knew what Ohio was to like be a champion out here. Like you even said to win class 2. When you say that now and kids don't understand it, like that's a dogfight. Like what are you going to beat? Steve Wilson and Dave Jacoby and all the legends that came through here, right?
That was crazy. There's you had blacks, then you had West Side Pacificos, the Pacificos, and then in Sandusky you had Steve Wilson and, you know, his brother and a couple other names I'm forgetting right now. Then the group that I was part of, that was in Toledo, that had Bob Wall, and then George Crawford was kind of retired at the time. But, you know, so it didn't really matter where you went. You know, my biggest decision coming out of college was, am I going to go to blacks or am I going to go to West Side? Because I kind of spent time, you know, at both. And that conversation with Louis kind of steered me more in that direction. And blacks was different. You know, they did all 3 lifts on one day, you know. And
I heard, yes.
Yeah. And it worked for me in college, you know, because it made the training during the week a little bit easier, and then it made the drive up, but it's a long ass day. They were crazy as fuck. I mean, that's actually where I met Matt Dimmel, right? Because he was kind of floating kind of back and forth, but that's where I formed a relationship with him there. And so I was really kind of leaning into that direction, you know, and because I thought Louis' stuff was bullshit, right? So that was kind of playing into that until that conversation with him that kind of changed all that. But that's in my hometown, that's where that Hall of Fame meet was, you know, which sure is a pinnacle. Then you had, you mentioned it earlier, the Y Nationals, you know, was another thing. And why Ohio, I have no idea. You know, it just happened that way. And it was interesting being around that. It's interesting looking back now, because I don't know if that will ever be replicated, you know, anywhere, you know.
Sure.
Because there's more gyms too, you know, so we need to take that into consideration. It's one of the things I say about West Side at the time was it wasn't an easy place to train. You know, it's not what people think, but it is what they think. So it's kind of a little bit of both worlds. You know, it wasn't as convict as what people think was portrayed, you know, through the film. But at the same time, you had to kind of deal with the bullshit and the drama. I don't want to really, the mind games, let's just put it that way. Louis' mind games. Because where were you going to go? There was nowhere else to go. So if you loved powerlifting and you're in Columbus and you're going to get thrown out, well, then you're just kind of fucked. You know,
yes.
You know, you're going to go to the world gym and train with somebody that's not that good. You know, so it forced everybody to have to stay in one place, but socially it was probably a great thing, because it forced you to be able to get along with people that you
Sure.
wouldn't hang out with normally ever, and then other ones like Bob Young's was one of the best friends I've ever had in my life, so the relationships that were formed were good as well. But that dynamic, and I'm sure Cleveland was the same way, with Blacks and Sandusky, with the crew that they had there, that forms that relate. Then you get people that are, and the thing with Louis too was I was the first person to ever move to Columbus to actually be at Westside. When I got there, I think he had 54 elite totals, and every one of those people were from Columbus. Most of them, the majority of them, from the west side of Columbus. So to have one gym in one neighborhood create, because you couldn't get on the elite total, list. When I came in there, I already had I had like 220, 242, 275. I couldn't get on that list until I got in the 308s, because I didn't earn it there. Right. So
I understand.
Yeah, I couldn't get on the 500 bench list. I couldn't get on any of these lists unless I did it there, at that gym. So that was kind of the first thing you got to get on. Though that became more important to me than PLUSA at that point. Then it was,
Sure.
His record board, which was, the pinnacle, of all that. Usually if you're on the record board, you're going to be in the top 100 and with that as well, where I'm fortunate to be in that environment, come up through that time, because France had something like that, Ernie. And I'm trying to think of other clubs, throughout, because you'd see the people at meets when you'd go there. And I think Willie trained with Ernie.
Yeah.
A while.
Mm-hmm. He did.
Another friend of mine I trained with in Toledo, Paul Urchik, was another one that used to go and train with him. And he was one that was battling back and forth with Chuck for a while.
Sure.
And then he may have out squatted Chuck, because he was there at France, and France was creating the canvas suit, and they were adjusting suits every training session because it was in the gym, and the seamstress and everybody was in there with all that. And so that was one of the frustrating parts with the gear, is you would go and it'd be like, son of a bitch, these guys be like, they own Taylor and all this other kind of stuff, customizing all this shit, and we're just throwing it on at a meet. But anyhow, I'm kind of going off topic. So when did you make your own, Chimp?
So what was happening was I was still training at Uptown, and I was saved. Well, California is expensive, and I was, so I went and lived a little bit more than a year with my buddies, but they were both cops. So long story short, I'm like, man, I'll move in with you guys. And, this is when I was still engaged. I said, my wife's, she's her fiance, she's finishing up college. Like, come live with us, and you don't have to pay rent. I'm like, for a year. I'm like, all right. Like, so I moved in with them. Well, did that, saved, and it allowed me to save a ton of money. Then I moved, get a down deposit on a house. But I bought my house in 96, and I was still training at Uptown, having a great time. A couple things happened. My main training partner came to me in 97. So we'd been hitting it. He was getting success. He was getting stronger. I was getting really strong. I had come in third at the WPC Can-Ams in Vegas. He just came to me and said, man, I can't do this anymore. My wife doesn't like it. I'm at night and stuff. Man, I was sad. I was like, man, this makes me sad, man. Cause he worked hard as a front end man, and he had a motorcycle business on the side and all this stuff, but he didn't want to give up 3 days a week and then Saturdays. Cause I wasn't a native Californian. So once you got there, you realize and I did some of this stuff. I went to Lake Havasu and partied on boats, and I didn't go to the sand dunes. I thought that's unsafe. And they go to the Yuma Dune, but, and then Big Bear to ski and stuff. Those California younger people like to do a lot of other stuff. And it wasn't, powerlifting I was whole hooked. After that 95 Cal States, I'm like, okay, I can really do good at this. This is feeling great. I'm going to get married. I'm going to buy a house. I'm going to settle down. And it was, it was game on for powerlifting for me. So I bought the house in 96 and started occasionally buying a piece of equipment when I'm an equipment guy. I love old equipment and stuff. If I saw quality, I bought it. I did buy a reverse hyper soon thereafter, and I did it too much, and my back was pumped up, and I had been just simulating it with a weight belt. And I'm like, man, I over pumped it. I had bought it for $900 from Louis, and I sold it for $2,000. Because I'm like, it felt to me like after using the machine, and I've used it, I'm not against it at all, but I think I overused it, right? Like it felt to me like doing a concentration curl and then trying to do a bent row with anything. I thought my low back felt too congested versus for me, I tell people this, I don't care what powerlifting program you did. One of the biggest successes I had coming to the West Side system was I did conditioning for at least 4 days a week, which would be dumbbell deadlifts. Even when I could deadlift over 750 with a conventional bar, I would use no more than 185. Usually it was 135 for 2 sets of 20, just to those quick 2 sets of 20 superset on lower body. On upper body do leg raises because it kind of tractions, but that's like 5 minutes of conditioning I would do. And it kept a healthy supply of blood in my low back. Louis taught me that. I couldn't figure out. I'd hurt my back in 87, my first year out of college, and I was doing a commercial job. I was old factory we were refurbishing. You had to go in and chip off tile with like goggles on and you'd have a blowtorch. And the highlight of the day was when you filled your wheelbarrow to walk out and dump it in a pile. I'm like, oh, my back got hurt. I consulted with a chiropractor. My dad's like, I'm not paying for a chiropractor. You're fine. Like, work it off. And I'm like, I went to a chiropractor. He gave me an x-ray of my back when I was 19. He goes, well, you have the back. Look at your disc surrounded. You have the back of an 80-year-old already. I'm like, ooh. So
I've heard the same thing.
Yeah. So I'm like, oh, okay. So I started I didn't know about Louis then, but this is 87. I found a program by Bill Starr. If you have a low back problem, do regular hypers, regular back extensions, raises. I did those 100 reps 3 times a week, and my back never felt to this day. I mean, I've had occasionally, but that really taught me how to fix my back, maintain it. So, I forget what
gym.
Oh yeah, no. So, but like I had the reverse hyper. When I took that $2,000, I'm like, oh, okay, now I can really start game on. And I fortunately being my training partners would joke, the lazy fed, the pencil pusher, like guys I met, like they would laugh. They'd kill me. I'd call them on Columbus Day at like 10 a.m. Like, hey, I'm still in bed. Like they would LeBaire and stuff, guys that worked their whole life, as a drywall. But those guys that I were with, it was game on for them too. They were so happy. Like a lot of them lived not near me per se. But the California traffic wasn't bad. I don't know, till the 2000s. It wasn't as bad. And what it was, when you see that old footage of us and building out that gym, and we started training there, everybody was real generous. Like everybody, like the gym I was at, Uptown's like, oh, they had a 440-pound cable stack, which was these 20-pound plates. But like going back, like what you said earlier, like West Side, like pull-throughs for me were amazing. And when I could do it with almost body weight and walk out and hold it and brace, like that blew my hamstrings up like nobody's business. So we had that, and Art was super handy. Everybody was generous. One of the guys I trained with, he knew a commercial welder from the local supermarket. And he made us like permanent squat stands because we were all kind of tall. Everybody was 5'10". We didn't have any short people. Nothing against them, but
no, you didn't have to worry about rack heights.
Yeah, we had a fixed pair, but we also had an adjustable pair. So it was a 2-car garage, and we just set it up to focus. I never brought my cars in. It was just focused on lifting. So I love building that out. To this day, I get excited. I bought piece by piece whenever. So in California, this is pre-Craigslist. This is the penny saver. So I'd go in there, and the 7-Eleven near my house, the guy's love-hate relationship because I give him a lot of business, but he's like, I'd open up the penny saver for 5 counties, LA, Orange, Victorville, San Bernardino, Ventura, and Riverside. I'd open all of them and like, gym equipment. I'd write the numbers like, you never buy. I go, I buy other stuff.
Yeah.
I buy protein. I go change the dates on the dairy products while you're hanging out. Go be useful. So I went out. When I was committed to lifting, I had a Ford Mustang. You're young and cool, and man, I turned that in because the insurance was $400 a month. I go, this is ridiculous. And I've never been in an accident, but in California. So I had a Ford Escort, which is not the easiest, not the easiest moving apparatus. But I found in '98, by 1998, I had a bunch of guys training with me, and soon thereafter, I found a gym closed out in Riverside. It was a commercial gym, and I show up and I became friends with this guy. I can picture him. I think his name was Larry, but that's what he did, was buy old gyms. So we exchange information and stuff. And he's like, man, nobody likes these old, heavy, rusty. I'm like, Yes, we do. Yes, please. So I have these, they're called American World Class. I bought 10 45s. I still have them to this day. American World Class. I guess they were made in the 60s up in Shipping Yard up in Northern California, but they don't pit. They weigh what they say they do. They're perfect. So I got those. He's like, oh, nobody needs these big dumbbells. They're like 130s. He's like, $10. I bet you can't carry those to your car. And I did. And he had money too. He'd show up with a Mercedes and he was doing just fine. But so I bought a lot of equipment there that I still have to this day. So I started accumulating. And then people are generous when you train with them. But we were USPF lifters. So we just needed one bar. We never, to this day, I never had a deadlift bar because I knew once I went to the APF, I'm like, well, that gives me a little spring in the meat. So that's 25 pounds bump and you're fresh. But I don't want to train like that, right? I like the dead bar. I got to get used to it, which I think you and I suffer from the same malady, a straight bar. I got up to 771 on a Texas power bar, but I feel it to this day. The pec tears didn't help, but I loved accumulating equipment. And it didn't take much, because a lot of Louis' stuff to me was the basic exercises were, again, kneeling squats. I got a lot of for me that isolated my hips. I love power good mornings. I don't do any others. I don't like good mornings. I did long bar.
So yeah.
Yeah. But power good mornings, when Louis demonstrated those, you just go about 4-6 inches, build that static strength. That was like a godsend to me. I'm like, oh my goodness, I had static strength. I'll never lose a squat. So, didn't have everything at the house, but we certainly had enough. And the most important thing are training partners, right?
Yeah. I mean, all we had really, if I'm thinking through there's squat racks, the bench rack, a lat machine, a belt squat, which when I first got there was a wooden platform with a hole in it. Nothing else we really used because it would be coming to my mind.
Yeah, we studied. So Thank you for checking out this episode of Under the Bar. If you want to hear more stories from me and who I attribute my success to in the powerlifting sport, check out Built by History on Amazon. It's a book I sell. Appreciate it. Thank you. I was thinking of this driving over here today. We studied the Demarest footage like Russian spies. Like, what do we have? Now, we never got a chest supported row. So then...
Yeah, we had that, yeah.
We didn't have that, but we figured... I would collect... I didn't ask, but I'm like, this is what we need. We had gone to the 98 seniors, and we as a team, we did pretty good. We're like, okay, we didn't enter as a team, but like we were ready to challenge Westside. That was always our secret, like going after Westside. So we decided to compile our money and buy... we bought a stability ball from you, which I still have. My kids, to this day, they use it to play Wipeout in all our pools. My dog, nothing, that green thing's impenetrable. I still have it. I think it was called a Swiss ball then.
Yeah.
But Dave, did the history here of Elite, were you guys Westside Warehouse first? You half-page ad? Okay. So I got to tell you, I've bought products from you and we bought your original belt squat. I remember...
just a belt with a chain? Yeah.
We're all excited. We're like, okay, we got it. It came in. We're going to open it. Yeah. I think we got the prototype. So, because you're...
no, that's what we were using. Because Louis had some guy that lived on his street that was making them in his house. Because what happened was Louis had his little mail order thing going on. It would sell the belt squat, the original safety squat bar, weight releasers, man arrays, couple other things that I can't remember. And he basically was just sick of it. And my wife was training in the night crew. I was in the morning crew, and she was bitching about whatever she was doing. And at the time I was still working as a trainer, but doing seminars and things like that. And they got talking, and he said something like, just sell this shit. Just get this off my plate. So then we would be that distributor of those things, because he didn't want to deal with the customer service. He didn't want to have to deal, because we had to take things to the post office to ship them out. Take it to the post office. He didn't want to do it. So he gave me a few $1,000s of whatever he had on consignment, and then that's kind of what started. But that was one of those products. And that was what we'd use on that wooden platform. And we had to use like 5 fucking Indian rugs around the belt, because it was not comfortable at all. There was nothing comfortable about the thing, right? And fortunately, because when I don't know how many we had, 15 or whatever it was going to be, my thing was, this is all I need is to send this out and have to start dealing with all these returns of people sending. Nobody ever sent any of them back, but it was it was not optimal. That's for damn sure.
So we're all gathered around it because, you know, we get many gym pieces.
Yeah.
And I'm supposedly the street smart kid from Boston, so they let me handle the purchase, right? And like, I remember opening that. And do you remember Brian Meek? God rest his soul. He's in the Hall of Fame, but he was originally from Ohio. He's like, this is what it's going to help us to get ahead of those mile guys. And he's a lawyer. He's gone, but God rest his soul. But I open it and they go, this is bullshit. Those guys want us to get hurt. They know we're Brian Meek's like, they're on.
Yeah.
They got, you know, because it was like,
it's a belt.
It was a belt, but like somebody had used the bedazzler to put like bolts all over it, like probably like a middle
with a chain around
but
it.
Like this is gonna break. And they kept saying, you got taken. They were like, oh, they weren't.
No, I get it. No, I completely understand.
They weren't so we transitioned to, do you remember your picture of you doing handle squats in PLUSA? You transitioned to doing that.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons why I started doing that. Why I would do that as well. You know, we still did the other thing, but it's, for those that are trying to picture what this was, it was essentially a weight belt with a chain attached to it that would go around with like
a whole bunch of brackets at some brackets. You could tell someone homemade it.
Oh yeah, we went 100%. Yeah. Oh yeah. And they didn't fall apart. I mean, we never used it. We were afraid. Yeah. But you had to use, I had one of the Indian rugs over there. You have to use those Indian rugs you buy like at a dollar store. And we needed like 4 of them, you know, to go around there, because the rivet to that thing, you know, the actual was a bolt or a screw.
Yeah, it was
driving into your back.
It would have been painful.
Oh yeah.
So those guys, but everything else we've ever gotten from you was great. But those guys, they were like, oh, they're West Side, you know, they're afraid we're catching them. And I don't think so. But I had a joy in building my gym, and people were super helpful. You know, we built it to build board for board presses, and you know, we never had a leg press. We didn't have a belt. I sold that house and moved to Texas in 2004. So it was perfect for what it was at the time. And I loved it. Fond memories. You know what I'm saying? Fortunately, I was able to, what I did was buy a camcorder, a Sony, and I taped a lot of those workouts, and I have the footage. So to finance myself, if you will, in the gym, back then, being a federal agent, they didn't have as stricter rules. You could have outside employment, if you will, or now you got to ask for permission, all this stuff. But I sold. So what happened was I started copying our workouts a couple hours in. I'm like, man, I got so much from the West Side stuff. Let me copy those. So I copied our max efforts and our workouts and some of our competitions. And I sold that for a couple of years on Go Heavy. And Ken Leisner, I sent him a copy, and he loved it. He wrote about it in his article. So I had my email address, so I would sell for $20. So that'll come in later. I sold the footage from like 98, 99 of us doing our exercises. So I'm like, well, if it helps, Westside stuff helps. And it wasn't, but I did make some money off it, which was just good old fashioned people mailing me money. So, later when I walked into a gym in Texas, when I moved there, like I walked into a gym, and guys like, hey, you're Paul Leonard. And he knew all about, he bought the tape. And I ended up later working with him. He got me an interview with I switched agencies in the federal government, which is great. It was, powerlifting's done nothing but lead to all great things for me. So yeah, I had joy in building and buying equipment and so forth. And occasionally we'd go try it out on the place and bounce it around. But until for 3 years, my house was the spot. And then right before my son was born, I hurt my knee. Trying to squat. I took out a crooked 766 up, like you referenced the Bob Moon meet, the memorial meet, like there was a meet in California called the Central Classic. Gene Estrada would do it. It was up in San Luis Obispo. The town would have a pancake breakfast. It was like it was a big deal, and it was a great meet. Like the records at her, Hank Hill squatted 900 there, and the records were huge. So I hurt my knee going into that contest, and during that contest squatting, and then I started rehab, and then I started on with a strongman crew, and I started, training with those folks.
All right. I need to use the restroom real quick, then we'll come back.
Yes, sir.
All right. Apologize.
Oh, no.
All right. So that's when you moved into the strongman?
Yeah, I moved into strongman at the end of 2000.
Yeah. So that's still in your house, the training?
No. Well, we bounce it around because you do a lot outside.
Yeah.
There's a place I named it. We called it the Freak Factory, my friend's house, because it was at its peak. There was 10, 15 guys coming out of like Charlie Captor was a pro, like ridiculously strong. So
now, did you still have the power lifters in your house at the time?
No. I'm like, man, guys, I'm going to pursue this.
Okay.
And at the same time, I had my son, and to be honest, like in law enforcement, once you have your you know, you're like, you use the phrase all in, and I was, but man, I'm like, the early 2000s wasn't the most pro strength environment in my professional world, you know, when you were a good size and I was doing everything legal, working with a doctor, but man, I just never wanted to jeopardize my career, because I'd be like, hey, come over to the house. And sometimes people would bring people. And like, you know, that like I learned in my profession, like how poll cameras work, and they'll look at an address and they'll pick 10 license plates, and then how people can be tangentially related. Like, so my guys were always, the guys I was with, it wasn't like you said, like a hardcore powerlifting garage. We were all great people. They're all super respectful, but I didn't know who all they knew, and you know, and I didn't want to go down. And I was more protective of my family. Like, but it was a perfect transition, because at the time I thought too that kind of you get kind of lazy. I was kind of getting lazy, you know, like, oh,
How heavy were you at that time?
the biggest I ever got, Dave, was 325 in 1998. So yeah, we can go back too, because I worked with one doctor if you want, but then after the 95 Cal States, like I was with one doctor, but then somebody introduced me another doctor, and he's like, yeah, you're fine, but man, let's go. What do you, okay, what do you want? And any U.S. pharmaceutical he prescribed to me, as long as I was healthy.
Yeah.
So that tape there.
So how did that work with your job though? Moving around to 325.
Well, if you look at there, like what happened, oh yeah, I can explain that. Sure. Yeah. Because my job was parent. So what had happened was, that's 1995. Then after that, I met the doctor. So I weighed in at 260. I mean, he's a legitimate,
No, I get it. He's a legitimate doctor.
He retired, and I tracked him down and thanked him. I don't want to drop names, but he's a legitimate doctor. I'll show you his picture. And he liked me, and I respected him. So I met with him, and so there I'm 262. August 11th, 1996, at the WPC Can-Ams, I weighed 296. So in the period of, I got married in September of 95, and I was still, and then it was game on. I was there wasn't, nobody ever uses the term with PEDs medicine, because that's what they are. If you use them correctly, they're medicines designed to make sick people healthier. And when you're strong already, they'll make you super strong, as long as you don't mess up your blood pressure and kidneys or so forth. Yeah. So, but I could talk, I've heard you go down, I could talk wax poetic about eating back then, because I still remember training at Uptown Gym when I was for that, and then going up into that year, I'm like, okay, I'm going to supers. So one of the things I did when I added PEDs, and I can be specific about that if you want to, but they used to sell this drink called White Lightning. Do you remember that? It was like a fruity punch, 40 grams of whey protein. So that was the first time ever I started inter-workout.
Yeah, I think I know. Yeah.
And so what we would do is do the max effort exercise at the gym, and then, two exercises in, then I would start intra-workout stuff, get some calories in me. Not junk. I ate 90% clean. I never ate junk. I never ate fast food. There was so much good food in California, and I had so much at my availability. So that takes us to 96. Again, I was training in 97. 97, it just wasn't the best year. And then you're always geared up at that point for a couple meets a year, right? I was probably 305. I didn't get to full supers. And what happened in the beginning of 97, sometime in 97, they came to me at work, and they stopped making, they said it was a big promotion, if you will. I worked on a congressional investigation. It was supposed to be 6 months where you just do desk work, not out in the field. So I'm like, oh, and then it ended up being 2 years. So I was disgusted with it, to be honest with you. In retrospect, what came out of it was nothing. It was whether the Democrats in 96 turned INS into a voter mill to get reelected, to get Gore elected, which he didn't. But I was on that for 2.5 years. It was the most boring. I was like, but it came to me, I'm like, game on. This is a chance for me to get as big, as strong as I can. And because, doing my profession, by then I already had some life-threatening situations out in the field. I'm like, man, I wouldn't want to be. But I'm like, okay, if I'm just sitting in the office and writing up reports, it made me a better writer, but I just decided to get as big as I could. So 97, I remember I trained hard. A good friend of mine got married. I went to his wedding 2 weeks before the state meet, and I partied a little bit too much, was on my feet a lot, came back from that, missed some training. So I get to, this is the first, you were referencing this before, so I get to this about the basketball court. So this is it's at a Gold's Gym in Northern California, or it's in Fresno, 4 hours north of LA. I'm like, I'm going to squat 800 to Fisher. I hadn't done that yet. I go to open up with 760, and I was one of those guys. I took the weight and I was aggressive, and I would stomp. It was on is an aerobics room, the side of the meet. So I stomp, and to this day, I've never felt like something my back just it just tightened up and spasmed, and that meat stunk. I was disgusted. LeBaire, people I knew were there. We weren't trained together yet, and I was like, man, this stinks. So I'm like, man, come 1998, it's on. I'm going to get a crew together at my house. I'm going to get the rest of the equipment the rest of this fall, because that was like the fall of 97. And man, all I did was eat, train, use medicine. I was newly married, sex, sleep. Oh, yeah, I worked, but it was just easy work. I mean, and there was, again, nothing I had access to everything. You know, I mean, testosterone and Tate or cypionate, you know, and Anadrol. Anything you could have legally in the U.S., because it'd be a 12-week androgenic cycle leading up to a big meet, and then come off, let all that stuff run out of your system for like a month, and then go anabolic, and then I mean, there was always DECA, and there was always Anavar tabs or Winstrol tabs if I wanted to, whatever, and it was all under my insurance. It was copay. It was $5, and you knew it was
perfect life, man.
God. Well, I tell people now, like, first of all, being in law enforcement, never risk your freedom over steroids. Be careful, but never risk your health.
Yeah.
Because now I buried, again, one of my best friends had kidney issues. He was adopted. We don't know, but he blew his kidneys out, and he was using everything under the sun from the black market. So caveat emptor, like let the buyer beware and be very careful, get your stuff measured. And because I was very fortunate that way, like that's at 56 now, I feel great. You know, I was laughing because I was catching up on the podcast. You felt just like me. I forget who you were talking to, like, man, you end up half as strong no matter how you try. You're like, if that, you're like, oh, you know,
that battle.
Yeah. But it's the battle, you know, you're still in the fight, you know, and you're healthy and all that stuff. So, food was, I mean, I encourage anybody, just educate yourself and be careful. Wait till nobody pushed that stuff on me. I made my adult decision when I was an adult and had the money and the ability. And that doctor loved me. He checked up on me all the time, you know, and if that was going into 96. So all of a sudden, I was like, the goal was to always go to the men's senior nationals. By then, in the state of California, USPF was always an option, but APF had taken over. And that gentleman there, Bob Packer, that was like, he's Mr. Powerlifting, you know, he looked, other than Steve Dennison, no one's done more. So he became the APF state chairman. And because Westside was doing it, I'm like, let me do that. Let me go over. I had done the canvas suit and the briefs for the WPC Can-Ams. And then the 97 states was APF. But 98, I did the Cal States. And I came in, I was 308s at that, and I came in first, but LeBaire really, we were training together. He really went off on that, and he beat bodybuilder Joe DeAngelis, who, God rest his soul, he's not with us, but he was strong. I mean, he was a strong guy, but he lifted like a bodybuilder. He was in that meet. So that was in May, but it was, that year was all about going to the seniors. The seniors were in Chicago. I couldn't wait. I'd made that goal my senior high school when I was reading the U.S. Powerlifting USA. When you see the seniors issue, you're like, there was 3. I'm like, man, I'm going to the APF. So I qualified, went over to Chicago. I ended up going 8 for 9. I weighed 325. But when you're at the APF seniors in the late 90s, you're not large. Mm-hmm. I think I saw Jim Veronin bend backwards in a chair because it was Chicago in July, and he had abs, and he was 360. First time I met Gary Frank, Gary bombed in that. But Brian Meek, you know, that was like the one moment in my life. I was 30 years old. I was 325. I was heavy as I could be, and I was like, man, I made it, man. I'm top 5 at the national. Phil Mendoza from here beat me. Mm-hmm. Very nice guy. I didn't get to talk to him much. Like, I looked this up before coming on open powerlifting. Like, everybody. Rich Coates won that whole thing. Mm-hmm. He was out of Kentucky, I think, and he never lifted again. Like some Alexander Pokrant, some of the guys that lifted never lifted again. I'm like, for me, that was the beginning. That's the first time. But I did I did an IPA Worlds in New York and came in 5th. Then I did 2003. I did the APF Seniors in LA and I came in 5th. But that was June, and you know, my wife was pregnant with twins. Which the twins, that effectively ended my strength career in a myriad of ways. But because I already had a child at home, but be that as it may, so man, I was cooking with gas. You know, I loved it. So then, sadly, Christmas Eve '98, my dad dies. So that meet, I did the seniors in 98. And then I thought, I'll keep you ever think, I'll keep the peak, which.
Yeah.
So then they said, the APF push-pull nationals are in Fresno in August. So I went up there and I only benched 460. The only thing I missed in Chicago was my first 500 bench. I missed it. I hadn't trained a lot with shirts, and it kind of just, my fingers went numb. But my training leading up to that had been really good. I was doing J.M. Blakely's basic bench program. For me, to go back in retrospect of everything that worked for me in my career, to squat heavy, I had to squat heavy. Like to squat over 800 pounds, I had to handle 800 pounds 3 days out of the week. There'd be one that I'd kind of do a box squat, not as deep. I never was a good morning guy. That didn't work for me. It didn't speak to me. But like Zerchers and kneelings, the special exercises work for me. When I tried to push my deadlift back to what I did in college for me was to deadlift at 650 as a national record. Whatever I could triple, I could get 60 pounds more. So I tripled 590, rested 10 days, and went and did a 650. That didn't work as I got bigger and heavier. I just couldn't. But the Louis speed percentage workout worked like a charm. 15 singles, 12 singles. You do a 5-week cycle and then sometimes max. And you can do it on a minor deficit. I've learned that over the years. I did a 4-inch deficit leading into that meet there. And going up to the Cal States, I was like excited. In January that year, I'm like, I'm going to do a 5-inch deficit, a 600, and then I'll do the cycle. Man, I pulled my oblique. I never felt anything like that. If the hand we've all felt, oh my God, there's nothing worse when your abs cramp. Yeah. So I learned, but that's, the special exercises worked and the box squats worked amazing. Like for me, whatever in my mind, what I could hack slick squat just with a belt, I could get almost 200 pounds on with canvas suits. I still use the same Franz briefs. I bought one pair of briefs in my whole life. I sound cheap and they work great. I wear them now. Just Donnie said, Donnie hit me up with a message, keep your hips warm, because sometimes I have a little hitch in my getty up. I'm sure you're familiar with that, and I never used a deadlift suit. When they came out, they were marathon. I think they're good now from what you see, but I just never used that. My best deadlift was raw. It was in a singlet, but it open powerlifting. It was at the seniors in 2003, but it was 750, and they listed it as multiply, which it wasn't. It was just a wrestling singlet I had. I wasn't a gear guy. I was fortunate to train with Josh Bryan, who was sponsored by Inzer, and then I posted something on Go Heavy in like 2000. I posted in 2001 when I came back to powerlifting in like 2002. I posted on Go Heavy. I used Fran's gear, and then Peter Thorne found my cell phone number, called me up. Maybe he's with the IPF. He's like, what do you need to be sponsored by Inzer? I go, just send me stuff, which infuriated Art because Art wasn't sponsored by anybody. He was a better lifter. And here was Josh with his hand-me-down. He used to drive a diesel Mercedes because he'd drive 150 miles to train with us. But if you pop Josh's trunk, there's 20 bench shirts. And that would infuriate Art. It was like Spy versus Spy. It wasn't probably as cutthroat as West Side, but it would piss people off. But Inzer was generous. Art would, if Art had to wear something Inzer, he would spray paint black. He'd spray paint the logo. And he also, Art he's very handy. He's a commercial drywaller, but he got a sewing machine. He ended up benching like 625 with his own homemade shirt, which.
Well, I mean, that's kind of how you had to alter things back then too. They had to figure, you had to know somebody.
Yeah. It's funny but we talked about earlier. So when we came back in 2000, I decided to come back after my son was born. I'm like, I'm gonna come back to powerlifting too, and I was doing strongman and both, but it was only I was gonna come back to USPF, which was plentiful in California. Under Steve Dennison, there were meets at Venice. You could do the Venice meet. So when I first came back, that was the first meet I did back was the Venice Beach push pull after my dad died. That was in August because I was not in a good spot for a while after my dad died. I was in a bad mood. I came back to work. And it was just nothing. It was like, man, he died at 58, 6 months into retirement. I was bitter. But then I got back into it. My guys got me back into it and helped me. And I came back to the USPF. So I would keep records in my mind. And I started shedding weight after my dad died. I'm like, well, I'm as big as I need to be. And then at work, too, I got put out back into the field. So you got to be able to move. And, you can't. I was still always walking around at like almost 300, but I moved fine at that. I felt good. All my blood markers were good. Because back then when I worked for the Department of Justice, like the one thing you had to go, if you were under 40, you had to go every 3 years for a physical. So your government physical, if you had any issues, they were looking hard at you, kind of like, And they take a blood and I was drug tested when I worked for the government. Like the way it would work was I was sometimes the last guy at the office. It would come in on the fax. Send Leonard to drug testing tomorrow. I'm like, I know where I'm going, so let me go. And again, the PEDs I were using, I had a doctor's prescription for, so I think they were just looking for the traditional street drugs. But at the same time, I was sweating. I'm like, man, I'm taking so much Ultimate Orange. What's that going to pop for?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Good Lord, because I was full. I don't know when to me, I associate that with California. I mean, I was knee deep in that stuff, and it was the best $20 you could spend for a bottle of that. Good Lord, it was good. But drug tested, never had any issues. But they look at your physical. One time, my blood pressure was 130/90. So they said, man, you should take a look at that. And so then I started educating myself, and I'd go whatever paperwork the government doctor would give me. I'd go to my regular doctor that was the good doctor. I don't want to, you started laughing before. He wasn't Dr. Feelgood. He's a legitimate California physician in accordance with their laws, but a good guy. And he kept me super healthy, and that's what he wanted to do. We both wanted to, I don't want to be debilitated. I probably by this time, later I've had surgeries because lifting, but I was a terrible patient. And I didn't like to be laid up. And I was fortunate. I didn't suffer we could talk, if you want to talk injuries, I didn't suffer my worst injury till 2002. And then I didn't get it fixed. There's a this bad pec tear. I didn't suffer that till then. And, so yeah, when I tore the pec, when I came back, I was doing strongman, and I love that. Like I kind of all over the page, but I get excited. I knew I get excited when I beat you, but I love strongman. So I met a crew, Kevin Kinsey's house in Downey. He was a high-level Highland Games athlete, big crazy hairs. Picture was in Milo once. So I met him, and my knee had been messed up from that squat in San Luis Obispo. But while my knee was messed up, I'm like, okay, I've come in top 5 once of the seniors. My knee was messed up. I was still training, and I started losing weight, but like my bench went bonkers because I wasn't squatting and deadlifting for the first time in 10 years. So then I hurt the knee in Columbus Day weekend of 2000. Veterans Day weekend, there was going to be the USPF Nationals in Burbank, run by Steve Dennison. So it was one of the first times I did it. Josh did it. George Brink, who was like my rival, did it. Art LeBaire did it. So I went bench only, and I hadn't had a 500-pound bench on the books, but man, I did that meet. I benched an easy 534. So Josh lent me a single ply. It was an Inzer denim, but it was like black, like that matte. Oh my God, that was just what the doctor ordered. Because my raw bench was about 450, and I had a friend's single ply. I had never used double ply. I just didn't work for me, right? And I got kind of more sick as it went along. I think Jim Wendler put it best in one of his books, an hour workout, we did 3 bench attempts because I'm into it, but then I wasn't. I'm like, man, and then you're not building any muscle. But no, I did that 2000 USPF Nationals. So Josh won the junior division. Art won the whole thing overall. He lifted amazing. And I won the bench, and I won best lifter. I was like, damn, I had trouble benching. 2 plates was a big deal. In my high school, you had to bench 250 to play high school football and get the shirt. So about 10 of us did. But there was my best friend benched 350, 380 in high school, Rafi. So I was around strong people my whole life. But to win that meant a lot. And I was 32. My first son was on the way. I'm like, okay, all right, let me tone this down. So it was kind of an easy transition. I went to rehab. I thought that knee injury was more serious, and I was able to go through therapy, and the guy worked me over, and I didn't need that. I didn't need any surgery. So then I met those strongman guys, and I started in with them spring of 2001, and acquiescent to having a child at home, but we were able to afford it. My wife stopped working. She stayed home with them, which was good. It was great. So, but I was in with those strongman guys, and I loved it. Much like any powerlifting crew, and I've listened to a lot of your podcasts. The thing for me about this was there's been nothing in my life like my strength friends. Nothing. Look, I went into internal affairs young in federal law enforcement. So, and I was the kid at one office. So But my buddies were line cops, and I got to party and hang out with all those guys and go to 911 parties and all that good stuff. I had a lot of that experience, but nothing spoke to me like the camaraderie and powerlifting, right? Like, and then the strongman crew I was in with were great people in California, like Charlie Captor, God bless his soul. So you know, like as a powerlifter, you go over there like, man, you know, and they were interested in my strength, and I was interested in what they were. And strongman was just, people can't imagine now what it's at. Like when I announced in Dallas 2 years ago, that was the world record for biggest strongman contest, over 600 competitors. Like Willie's built, and there's more than one federation, right? But strongman's blown up. But you remember in the early 2000s when it started, what it was like those guys that were into it, like the guys in the mid, like it was in Texas, it was in St. Louis. You know, Willie got into it real early, but then it was like the guys in the Midwest, like Chad Coy he's amazing. I hope he gets on here sometime. He's an amazing guy. But him, Brian Schoonfeld, and Brian Neese were like in Indiana. But like those guys, when they got into strongman, were like, they knew we had no cardio. You know, like when they were going to get a hold of us. So I went to work out with this strongman, and it was immediately the best way I've ever done to rehab my knee, because farmer's walk, dragging. So it's a limited range of motion, but you're pumping so much blood in your legs, right? And it was just brutal. And like, so Charlie Captor, if you don't know who he is, he turned pro in strongman after a year. He's 6'10", like 370. And like he lived out in Riverside. Sometimes we train at his place, but Kevin was like the broker. So like he's like, yeah, and Charlie was really interested at the time, in the lifting community across all spectrums. Ronnie Coleman's The Unbelievable had dropped, that videotape, to see him handling the 200-pound dumbbells and stuff. And it was like, so those strongmen were watching some of that, and they knew what powerlifting was, so they liked the list. But we all got together, but like Charlie and I, so I think I'm pretty strong, you know, and we became fast friends. But like, you know, we're there one time where we all had pools. We're at a pool party, like we didn't know each other that well, but like he looks at me, he's like, dude, it's on, like test the strength. That, and Charlie's background was he was a roofer. He owned a roofing company, so he had a truck that used to hold, like, as a picture on my internet on my Instagram, me pulling his truck loaded with a load of roofing tiles and a forklift. It weighed 70,000 pounds. And before Charlie could afford the forklift, he would load those. So, you know, I thought I had strength, but like that, you ever have someone grab a hold of you that makes you feel like,
oh yeah.
And then, yeah, Charlie did that with me. He couldn't deadlift 600. To this day, he never has. But strongman was a little different. But we did test the strength in the pool. And then when he made me, quit, I'm like, all right, I'll teach you. Yeah, it was like, and super nice guy. So I had so much fun so I got in with those guys. That was the spring. They said, hey, it's kind of like probably like Westside was. Like those guys went to do New Mexico's Strongest Man in like July. They go, hey, September, we're doing, it wasn't called California's Strongest Man. It was called Railtown. It was called Jamestown. They go, you're doing that. You're part of us. You're going to do good at this. I'm like, all right, let's, it's on. It was September 9th, 2001. Of course, remember the date. It's easy now for me. But so we go up there to California, and I end up coming in like fifth. Charlie wins it. Kevin comes in second. But it was like so cool in that, like, we got to pull a 66,000 pound train, you know, like, because this Railtown was an old West museum where they used to film movies. And my dad was into Westerns. I wasn't. I still to this day, I'm like, oh, Westerns, you know. I've competed at Tombstone. I can talk about that too, because that used to have a gym. But to do that at first was cool. It was like a breath of fresh air. It felt good. And the guys I was in with were great guys. You know, nothing against my powerlifting guys, but they were all kind of, I forget what Josh was doing by then. He was doing powerlifting, but he soon thereafter moved, because he moved before me. He went over to Louisiana for a while. But the powerlifting, the strongman and the powerlifting guys are in with good, but these strongmen were like more younger, family-oriented guys. Nothing against the other, but it was just a good fit, and we had a good time. So I did that meet, and then the next day was a Monday. I took off. Next day is Tuesday. I'm in my car with I picked my partner up. With the time difference in California, we're on the road, and our boss calls and said, I don't know what's going on September 11th. I don't know what's going on, guys. Don't come to the building because the U.S. is under attack. Just, you know, I'll give you further instruction, because no one knew, right? So that certainly impacted my work and jobs, because the teeth in a lot of those terrorist investigations early was immigration fraud. And that's what I was specializing in Los Angeles at the time, like how compromised the immigration process was and all that good stuff. So that was kind of my specialty. So that career got busy. Still had, just had wife was still at home with one kid. We're doing good. And I fit in training as best I could. But then, I'm like, okay, training was going really good, strongman wise. I'm like, excuse me, let me try and get my pro card. So back then it was a different process. There was Art McDermott ran a contest called the Northeast Strongman Showdown, which Murph was at that, but I've never met Murph, but he was at that. We didn't get to talk, but so I went there and it was a pro-am. So the pro division, Sven Carlson was there. He had just won World's Strongest Man in September of 2001. I met him. He was in the pro-am, but like Carl Gillingham beat him. And Chad Coy was there. He was so I tried out. Long story short, there was like 36 of us. Clinton Darden, I think, was there too that day. But I came in like 14th overall. So top 10 would have gone on to the next day. I didn't do that. And then top 5. I didn't have the log press strength. I couldn't clean a log well. I did 275 for 3, which was funny in 2002 because at World's Strongest Man in 2001, the one on TV, they were cleaning a 262-pound log. So here at the AMs, we're trying 275 a few months later. But nowadays, like, look at the lady, God bless them, the ladies are doing that, like it's not a huge log.
Yeah.
But like our medleys, our goal was the first event was 2-inch handles on the Illumitech the farmer's walk, 300 pounds each hand, go 200 feet. Like I broadcast strongman now. They don't do distance anymore. But even back then, they like to torture the old femme powerlifters, like, oh, I got 146 feet with that. I did pretty good. Didn't finish it. Our medley was 100-pound, 750-pound yoke, go 100 feet, drag 750 back 100 feet in 2 minutes. And I finished that. So I had some pretty good cardio. And I was really like, okay, I came in 14th in this first go. I can become a pro strongman. The year progresses. There was supposed to be another, that Northern Cal people were going to do a strongman group in like 2002, a contest, and then that got canceled because it was really fledgling back then, right? It wasn't set in stone. It wasn't like powerlifting. Sometimes contests got canceled. Mm-hmm. So it's 2002, and I'm like, man, what do I got to do? Like, I want to do something. I was always the competitive itch. Stupidly, I stopped it. Not stupid, stupid on my part. I went to my powerlifters, they had then matriculated down to Orange County Strength, my friend Manny Sanchez's garage in Fountain Valley. So I headed back down there. I'm like, I'll get a bench workout in. And they're like, oh, you're giving me kind of shit. Yo, you abandoned us for strongman and stuff, right? And I'm thinking, I'm warming up and I hadn't been benching. And pay attention to this kid. So I'm warming up and your ego gets the best of you. I'm like, they're like, oh man, that 365 bench looks crappy. I'm like, I'll go 385. I get that. And then I'm like, it's kind of sticky. Well, I've been doing a lot of log press. Let me go wide. And 405, boom. I mean, like a shot with a gun. Mm-hmm. Totally tore this pec off stupidly to appease ego. And these guys that all see me bench 450 raw, like what stupidly when you're not benching. And so I tore that pec, and I say that was 2002. Didn't get it fixed. I'm like, it rolled up, bled out, totally jet black. I mean, bled out, but I didn't get any clot. I'm still here, right? Didn't get any clots. It pissed me off, and I'm like, ugh. So 6 weeks later, the Strongman show was going to go into canceled. I didn't do, even though I was in law enforcement, I did do a lot of police Olympics and stuff. And even though they had that in Powerlifting USA, write it up. I did the California, they're called the Western States Games. So it's like 15 states come to a different location. In this case, it was in my backyard. It was in, at Santa Ana College in June. It was on my dad's birthday too. So I'm like, all right, let me do that. It's a push-pull sanctioned by the USPF and Steve Dennison, but it counts. And I had a torn pec, but I went in that, and I remember I weighed like 285, and it's all raw. So this is the first time I did powerlifting raw, because I didn't have to, but I'm like, okay, let's just do this raw, because I'm not going to load up on a shirt and really blow this out. I didn't, so I benched, I remember that, 302, 303, up to 352 raw, close grip, no problem. Pushed that up with no pec. And then I deadlifted well, because strongman, by this is the point. I hadn't been in a powerlifting contest since 2000, and man, I vaporized like 650, 705, 733 easy on a Texas power bar. I was like, damn, this is because I've been doing all that dragging, all the work that a strongman does, bending their legs against resistance, as opposed to 3 max effort reps and being lazy, then going to eat. The more work leads me to success. So I did that. Then I traveled in 2002. I traveled and I was away for a couple of weeks. Missed my wife, if you know what I mean. Come back. And then like by that fall, I'm like, okay, thinking, okay, strongman. And then she's like, hey, she comes to me, she goes, hey, I'm pregnant. I'm like, all right. She's like, it's twins. And I'm like, and she had miscarried a baby in 99. Then we had a healthy baby who's kept us quite busy in 2000. So I'm like, man, yeah, let me, strongman, when I did that strongman training, trained for medleys and stuff, I would throw up, pass out, cramp like I've never cramped before. And it's just like, man, it was a lot to give up. Like I couldn't be all in. I'm like, and still be a good family guy because I needed some energy. Now powerlifting I could. I mean, I still got the energy to powerlift. And so like the focus was, making sure she's okay, helping out. And by then, by 2002, my youngest he was born in December of 20. So he was 1.5. He's, when they come, the problem with guys before they have a kid, you think they come out, it's like a runny little egg. You're like, oh, this isn't fun. It's messy. It's messy, but then when they're fun at 1.5, you're like, let's kick ass. Yeah. Get on my shoulders. Yeah. And there was no place I wouldn't take him. Yes, yeah. I was just telling Owen there, he's got the Texas chainsaw hat. Like I went to announce at a meet and like in Venice after my twins were born, but I brought my boy and at the time, Andrew Bernarski, who ended up playing Leatherface, was there. He was he was way bigger than a huge guy. Like I handed off my son to him. My son was terrified, saying he looked frightening, but, no, I had a lot of fun and, my kids always been at home. I have 1 pound Yorks, the official ones. Mm-hmm. And, then I bought stuff from you. Eventually I bought climbing ropes and peg boards and all that stuff. Cause my gym was always for them, but yeah, once the twins came, it was game on. I got my pec fixed. In 2004, I decided, okay, the twins are here. They're healthy. I'm going to be in a sling, but let's get the, let's get healed. And then I got a chance to transfer to Dallas, Texas. And I was sick of Southern California at that time. It was just, I wasn't a native, the traffic, and the family. And I'm like, okay, we're doing good. We could cash in. We had a lot of home equity at the time and let's go to Dallas. I had an aunt there. My sister had lived there a little bit. I always wanted to live in Dallas. So I'm like, in Texas and check it out. So we moved, get over to Texas. The move is fine. And we're there getting situated. And I'm like, okay, I feel good. This was repaired in April of 2004. And what it was the doctor went in. I went with Dr. Joseph Mayo, great surgeon. Related to the Mayo Clinic, but it's in Southern California. He redid my pec. And I remember you've torn tendons. It doesn't, it's weird because the muscle's quivering for like tightness and tension, but it doesn't hurt. Like I came to from that and I'm like, oh, I was in such pain. I remember that. Like the first time ever, I'm like, I was like doc beside myself. So he gave me a morphine drip, which I'm like, man, I don't want to become an addict. And he kept me one night in the hospital, which how rare that is now. But then the next morning I woke up, I'm like, doc, I'm an addict. I hit that like 100 times. He goes, no, you hit it once, Paul. You're fine, And it worked like a charm. And I showered, got up, and then got on with my life. So we relocate to Texas. Had some family help in that, but my wife and I didn't have a lot of help with the kids. Somewhat. She had family nearby, but everybody's living their own life. So it was her and I, 3 kids. Okay, we moved to Texas. Oh, so stupid. I get excited. I'm there, right? And once they screw into bone, right, and they screw it into a different location, you're supposed to let bone heal over it. Takes 6 months. So of course in meathead math, I got 3, I'm good. Yeah. So in Dallas, gyms are great, right? You walk in like Metroflex, Brian Dobson was great. When I walked in the door there, my money was no good there. I'm like, no, I'm going to pay. I understand you can keep the lights on, but I trained at a place called Stroud's. Fantastic gym.
I did a seminar there one time.
Yeah. Kirk Stroud, God rest his soul. He's Brian's exact age and he's passed away a couple years ago, but Kirk was a great guy. He'd give me advice. And I was like, Kirk, I'm thinking open up a gym. He's like, no, open up tanning salons. They work way better. He's a great guy. Yeah. Kirk's a great guy. So, and if a lot of the footage people see online, back in the glory days of the bodybuilders out there, like Johnny Jackson, my friend, Branch Warren, and even Ronnie, they were training at Stroud's because it was a regular gym and then a power place in the back with dumbbells to like 220. It was no joke. So there I am. I had started work with the Department of Justice. I transferred over there and we got a beautiful home situated. So I'm only there I'm not there about a month. I'm like, let me start training. I go in, I start benching the power rack by myself. I go to bench 255. So I'll warm up play two, I'd been a 450 raw bencher. This is repaired, close grip. I take the bar down at 255, and on the first rep, my arm explodes. And it as opposed to tearing a tendon, it hurts bad. And it's July 2nd. The bar drops on pins, and I get out, and I can't move my arm. It felt like nothing I felt like nothing I ever had. My hand starts swelling up like a catcher's mitt. What had happened was, so it's July 2nd. And then the next day, like that was Friday, it was a Friday morning. And then I couldn't get in to see a doctor, and I didn't go to the emergency room. I'll tough this out. And I found the best surgeon in town. I talked to some people, go see this guy. Well, he couldn't see me till like July 5th or something, after the 4th of July. I'm like, all right. I was in pain. What I did was that when I went to the negative, the new, where they relocated the attachment, it broke my humerus in half. If you had told me I had benched 550 in a shirt, 534 in a meet, all the stuff I'd done at that point, I was 36 years old. If you had told me you could break your arm, and I didn't go into it real ballistic, but it shocked me. I broke my humerus. Oh my God, that hurt. That hurt bad. And then, I tell athletes when I talk to them, I said, and you hear a lot, I listen to a lot of your podcasts and the people that become new parents and stuff, like, what it is like, it's like that original Grinch movie, like when his heart grows at the end. When you're an athlete, you're so selfish. Your heart's, when you better start shrinking that heart when you're a kid, when you have kids, because it's them first, right, to do it right. So I was still kind of selfish to do that, and I go home, your wife gives you a look, what did you do? I go, man, I'm hurt. And I had not been hurt. That hurt bad, breaking it. She's like, all right, we'll figure it out. Like, but then you're rewarded with, and I'm helping out. I helped way out more with the twins than I did with the deal. She was so happy to be a parent. Like the first kid was on her hip, my son, like it was, in retrospect, it was easy, like the twins, all hands on deck, man. There's diapers that need to be cleaned. And then like, I got to tell you, you haven't lived till you've changed a diaper in a sling. Because justifiably so, the boy pees on your face as he should, because you deserve it. And my first one was a boy, so it was easy. But my girl, it's way different. You're cleaning and you're like, and I'd be like trying to hold him on it was very humbling. But I said, man, I'm never going to do this again. This is so selfish to my family. And then that happened in July. My family was great. They were understanding, and the kids don't really understand when you're in a sling, but you feel like such an a-hole. Work, I had plenty of sick time built up, but they weren't happy. I just showed up to this office and they were like, you did it what? Lifting weights? I'm like, yes. You're entitled to fit time when you work for the government, but they don't like that, to be honest. And these bosses didn't in Texas at all. They didn't, you're supposed to be naturally strong there and just pray for it. But be that as it may, I won't beat that.
Whatever that means.
Yes. But those guys, there's a special place for those. But so then I'm like, okay, let me just heal this. Well, then I was so stubborn, I didn't go to PT. And I got frozen shoulder, which I didn't believe in. And I had pretty strong shoulders at one time, and that just froze up. I'm like, I couldn't lift my arm. And then, so they came to me. I had become a firearms instructor in December 2003 to better serve people, and just to, in your career, you could do different collateral duties, or some more important than others, but that to me was important. So I got that cert. It's a 2-3 week cert. You go away to the academy. So I was like, my boss comes to me, he's like, man, you got to go away in October of 2004 to represent us at the annual, recertification. I go, I just got it in 2003, a year. He goes, no, you got to go. So that's how I rehabbed it out of spite, wall walking with this hand, because you got to shoot with both hands. And I did it. I went, and it was okay. And then the arm started coming back. Josh Bryant relocated over there because I had known him, and trained with him. And I started thinking, man, I got to lift. It didn't kill my desire to lift, but I wasn't interested in traditional powerlifting with the suits and all that stuff. But at that time, then that promoter in New England started those raw contests. There was a big raw powerlifting contest, but there was also the announcement for this thing called the Atlantis Strongman Contest. So it ended up being judged by Ed Cohen, and that was going to be the fall of 2005. They announced that early, and Josh's like, I'm training for that. It was trap bar, low handle deadlift, bench press, push press, parallel grip chin up from a scaffolding with weight, and then a grip. It was a grip thing like the inch handle dumbbell, but you could add weight to it, so it wasn't the 173, because most people, I never was able to try I almost got the inch, but it makes your knuckles crack, and I couldn't break it. So I started training with Josh in earnest for that. And man, he helped me out greatly, because it was I set up it at my gym, and sometimes we'd go to Metroflex, the original Metroflex Arlington. Brian was super to us. So, but and it was able to train and just train hard, like you said. Some of your best workouts like an hour, and some things you can train more than others. I was coming, Josh being the bencher he is, but so I was able to come back in that. Vinny DeCenzo comes in second in that meet, but I trained hard, learned how to. But I was really proud. I came in fourth in that up in Massachusetts, so a lot of family could go see me. And I felt, man, I really like this. I like this sport. It was our own sport. Kazmaier had done the judge at the early one, but Cohen was there. To me, it was legitimate. And Josh, on his YouTube, you could see, full 45 military press. It wasn't even, that wasn't his limit. 820 low handle trap bar. And well, the thing about that, Dave, now picture this, like I say this, because when you would go as hard as you could, when you go balls out, low handle trap bar, I was always pec dominant. So when I pulled up, I pulled 650 at that. It was hard, but I got it up. My pecs are cramping. And then I was still able to bench 390 raw, like half hour later maybe. And then I military pressed 320. It's good for me, a push press from the rack. And then I did 55 pounds on my chin up and I think 150 on the handle. I loved it. I'm like, man, this is cool. It's because even though I trained with Josh at the time and had the work situation I had was super. To say they were they weren't good people to work for. The work-life balance was be miserable, be in the hinterlands of Arkansas or Texas. We'll call you when we need you. Get out of here. But I could train that stuff alone. Too would always, like when we talked about what we stock in a gym earlier, like one of the first things I did was buy heavy dumbbells because I loved how you guys would talk about dumbbells. Nobody else had talked about that because if I couldn't make you would fume if your schedule got messed up, right? Like back in the day, if I couldn't make my Thursday night bench, I'd have to call everybody. Hey, I can't make it work. Occasionally work would rear its ugly head. But I could the next morning or when I got home, I could just do a heavy dumbbell workout by myself. So I always loved that about Westside, all the different exercises. But that Atlanta style that I got into, I love that. And I got strong. I felt healthy. I came back. There was a time I thought I would lose, you lose feeling in your hand and all that good stuff. And then it didn't work. I'm like, man, but it came back. So 05 was a good year. In 06, Josh and I promoted Texas Strongest Man in that format. And it was at the Ronnie Coleman Bodybuilding Classic at the Expo. So he promoted it, and he was getting ready. He started getting into bodybuilding about then, and Josh was building his business and stuff. So he was looking for other avenues to climb. He had done traditional strongman, but Josh doesn't have the best leverage for the way that was going, in that it's kind of heading into a tall man sport. But not that his raw strength is I'm sure in your lifetime you've seen people like, oh my God, I'm glad I was around that. You know what I'm saying? So I did that and I came in second in Texas Strongest Man. I got a 700 trap bar, over 400 in the bench raw, 320 in the push press, chin like 75 pounds. And then all those lifts went up and I'm like, man, this is great. And then that, whatever the Atlantis Foundation was, and like it fell off, it ceased to exist. And I heard the powerlifters that did the raw meat did get paid, like Donnie and those guys. Josh, I know, got paid. I didn't get paid. Fourth, I got nice trophies, but I didn't get paid. And I thought it would be great if that would continue on. You know what I'm saying? Like, it didn't. So then I'm like, 06, man, I'm like, I decided I was 38 years old and I'm like, well, I'm pushing it. And then I had a doctor in Texas that was also accommodating in terms of me using PEDs, not as accommodating as my California doctor, but I could get testosterone. And that doctor, that was the first time ever the doctor's like, look, you've been on hormones for like, by the time over 10 years, he's like, that was the first doctor to ever prescribe me growth hormone. He goes, it's probably suppressed in you. And with all your healing, man, he prescribed me through my insurance. I got 2 IUs of growth hormone. And I was amazed in taking that and what it does, like cosmetic, like you shed body fat, like cosmetically. I didn't know what bodybuilders were doing that and so forth. But like, I'm like, whatever you give me, it's copay. I'll do it. It was the pen in the stomach. I did that for a year, but it helped me get rid of a lot more fat that I was. Made me feel healthy, and I'm rebuilding whatever they'll give me to rebuild me so I can work harder, so I can pull the wagon another however many years I got left. And so I quit using PEDs in 06. I'd been on the growth hormone, I think, when I got to Dallas in 05. for America's Strongest Man, the 2 I use, and then testosterone. But that doctor wouldn't write the stuff California doctor would. He would write like Decadurabon for the off season, but the other one was, game on. Like what do you got? What do we have that will help you? This will help you. He's the doctor, not me.
Yeah.
He was helping me, but like I have a vast experience with everything that you could get pharmaceutically wise. You know what I'm saying? I'm going into if anybody's listening, hopefully like going into a strength competition. You said it best. Like when I heard you say it, like, all right, I want a total 2000.
Yeah.
So that's, that's 3 cc's of test twice a week. That's 600. That's 1200 megs of either an anthony-cypionate. Then it's 1 anadrol a day, cut it in half. So it's 25 megs. Because I didn't want to put, I studied don't put all that through your body at once. Cut an anadrol a day in half. That's 50 milligrams. So you're talking 1200. That's 1500. And the rest was Deca. Now, there was I joke, you say this all the time too, back then what worked?
Yeah.
Like what didn't? Okay. So in addition to that, like I had access to testosterone suspension. So on the heavier workouts, I could take a shot of that. Aqueous, the shake it up, milk and magnesia looking, it's water-based test, 100 milligrams. I would take a shot of that on bench. As soon as I got home, see, back then our 2 heavy days were Thursday. So I could always have the deck cleared, usually that I was home Thursday to bench. And then Saturday morning, I didn't have to work. Other than that, the other days I would train. I didn't catch as catch can, and I didn't like to disappoint the guys I work with. And I didn't want to disappoint my training partners because I was still the kid around the office. So if somebody's case popped off and man, the old acronym, they call you a DWF, doorway filler. Like where's the doorway filler? Where's Leonard? I had a specific role. I was good at it. Like they might grab me. So I didn't want to cancel on everybody. So I would do there were occasionally, Art was his own business owner. So occasionally he would do some dynamic assistant stuff with me on Tuesday. But my crew only came to California on Thursday nights to bench and Saturday. So if we were going to do that, I could obviously take a pop of testosterone in my house before I couldn't take it with me during the day.
Yeah.
But, and the only other thing that worked, the environment was different back then. So we could go to the feed store and buy Phenoplex. So what I would do is keep a shot glass and I'd put DMSO in it. And then I'd crush up Phenoplex and Bare aspirin. So anything on me that was sore, I'd rub that in. That's got to help, right? Like what could go wrong?
Yeah, exactly.
Phenoplex was trenbolone acetate in a cattle. There was some other stuff in there, but I'm sure 7 layers of dermis, something's going to filter it out. And I kept that clean. I didn't let anybody put their fingers in. I told people how to do it, but maybe some other people had done it, but not now in 2024. When you turn on the social media and you see people like, I'm on trend. Like I was there in Southern California and I was dialed in. Trend was not grown up. It wasn't falling off trees. You know what I'm saying? For us.
Yeah, it would have been parabolic.
Yeah, 76 milligrams. And we would, in the book, it would say that was from France. And you'd tell people and I don't want to say which one of my crews was no, nothing strong comes out of France. We don't need that.
Well, for me, it was a misconception. It was a money thing. It's like, I'm not going to pay $18 for 76 milligrams when I can pay, $40 for 10 cc's of test at 200 milligrams, so everything was calculated. I call it test math. So it's like anything that I look at, it's like, no, that's going to cost me 10 bottles of test. So no, that's not worth that. So I'd equate anything I'd buy or would potentially want to buy with how many bottles of test could I get with that? But it's, I found out, later that the compounds are different. It's the milligrams. I should have taken more Parabolin, going back and looking at that because it was essentially Tren, which was stronger. But I just based it upon a milligram thing, which was by whatever you want to totals, what it's going to end up being.
Yeah,
that's just old school as fuck. Like, it's kind of how it was.
Yeah, it seemed to work when I listen to you. I'm so fascinated now. It always will be at Strong People. And I saw you had John Hack on here and listened to him. And when he talked about his dosages and 100%, I'm sure honest, amazing. I'm like, man, I would still have stuff at home if I'd gone at that ratio.
Yeah, exactly.
But, one of the thing about it, like growing up and you would look at the whole bodybuilding. You know, my favorite movie at first was like Pumping Iron. You know, we thought that was great growing up, right? And it was on TV, and that training footage they showed. Hopefully one day they release more of that, right? That's like amazing to see. But we love that. But like once I got out there, and like again, you played the clip. I consider him a friend. Once I beat a Hearn, and then saw like there was always that mystique. Something was in Venice that was like, like they had the potion. No, you know, and we would hear, you know, and I knew people that would go over there. I trained at Gold's Gym Venice only once, just to say I did it, because you got to do it. And I don't know if you've ever had the honor, but it's a funny story. I'll keep it family friendly, but normally I had a set schedule, but I'm like, okay, my girl was working, and I was kind of getting sick. I had been going out with my buddies at clubs and stuff. That gets old. You're on your feet, you're tired, and you're eating junk food. So I don't know the year, but I'm there at Gold's at Venice, and it's a Saturday night because she worked at a restaurant and was going to get off at like 10. So, because I'm in, my whole life was basically in Orange County from 95 on. I lived around. But anyways, I'm in Gold's in Venice, and it's like different. You haven't been there? No?
No.
It's like different rooms. So like, thank you for checking out this episode of Under the Bar. If you want to hear more stories from me and who I attribute my success to in the powerlifting sport, check out Built by History on Amazon. It's a book I sell. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Today we're going to go over our pro model back raise, 45-degree back extension. I always encourage people to go with this model. This is the one I have myself. To me, the big advantages of this are the adjustability on our pads and the wide foot plate, and the adjustability of the roller pads. With those adjustments, there are a million different variations you can do on this. And to me, for the investment, a couple hundred extra bucks above our other models, it's a no-brainer. So,
all right, guys, I'm here at elitefts. I'm at the compound. Nobody is watching right now, so bear with me. I found some bands that I need really, really bad. I'm going to throw them in my bag and take them home with me, so don't tell anybody. Bands are absolutely great. If you're looking for the safest way to train to become fast, to become explosive, become strong, safety. Watch some videos about using bands. Why should you buy the Elite FTS bands? I swear. Promise you guys, these bands will last longer than any other bands you will buy anywhere. They're a little more expensive. They're going to last a heck of a lot longer. EliteFTS.com. Get your bands just like I am. See ya.
All right, guys, you like the podcast, but maybe you're a little tired of all the interruptions. We set up a YouTube membership. You'll get extra content, and it's all ad-free. Join today.
Like one wall overlaps this other wall, right? So I'm looking around. First of all, they don't have 100-pound plates. So I'm saying, I'm like, of course they're not strong. Maybe it's changed, but of course, you're finding reasons to hate it.
Yeah.
Gold's Venice. And then so I see the way I could see in another room, there's a gal repping 185 there's hardly anyone in the gym. This gal's jacked and she's repping 185 on the bench. Probably put me to shame. And I'm looking, and I'm like, okay, so I'm minding my business. And then she comes over to me and she's like, can you spot me on the bench? And I'm like, okay, she's really well built, and I'm like, all right. So we go, go over there, and there's 135 on the bench. I'm like, this will be easy. So and I'm a gentleman. I always will be. Father of a daughter, came from a woman, love them all. I hand off to the bench and she takes it down. She's like, no. She had a foreign accent. I don't know what it was. She spoke English, but it was a foreign European accent. She's like, no. That's not how you spot me. She's like, put your hands on the bar. And I go like this. She goes, no, put your hands under the bar. And then she's like, no, put your hands like this. So I'm like, all right, I aim to please, right? She takes the bench down and they land on her nipples.
No.
And Dave, she goes like this. She goes, I'm like, oh. No, and I'm not there for that reason. You know what I'm saying? I'm like,
Well,
yeah, we're good. We're good, but due respect, I'm like, man, it takes all kinds.
Yeah.
But I didn't, back when I was out there, Gold's Venice there was no mystique to us. Other than Ronnie Fedke, who was amazingly strong. Micah Hearn is strong, was trained there, but there wasn't. Now, Ned Lowe, Powerlifter Video Magazine, would film down there when people would come into town, but he also came to my house and filmed. Great guy. But we had no mystique that someone in Venice was stronger because I was dialed in enough with guys, even though I would still listen to stories of PEDs and what was available, what was around and stuff. If there was someone down the street 3 times as strong, you might have been like this, but my garage was it for a while, LeBear, and then Bryant. Nobody was, even Brian Meek, who'd been there forever, was a lawyer. He was, we all kind of had everybody was kind of like respectful of me. Like, I don't bring anything to my home that's not, I love what you guys are doing. Like, one time we'd have strangers come in. One time a good guy came in, medium level lifter. We're lifting in the back. This is before Rubish. So we had a washer and dryer too, but you couldn't see it. That was in the back of my garage. And like, this guy came and he's leaving. His gym bag was there. And like, he's leaving. I shake his hand. I say his name. Good guy. He's like, yeah. He goes, I left you some. Thanks for letting me train you. He winked. And I go back on the washing machine. There's like 2 brand new bottles of Loraball and, like a gift. And I'm like, hey, I told him, I go, you think you forgot something? I wasn't paranoid when I was in law enforcement, but I'm not putting my hands on those. I'm not putting fingerprints, but everybody was super respectful. And like, once you've been in the profession, you see some of the things I looked at, what people do to children and so forth. You're like, this isn't even people using hormones. It doesn't. There's a million other things we could. Well, yeah. Don't even get me started on Balco and Nowitzki on them. That frustrates the living. Oh, that I'll go on a crazy tangent about that. Drives me crazy when you think about the reality of that. But I don't want to get too far afield.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it always would crack me up how paranoid people were that. So they thought the cops were going to come arrest them because they were taking, tests for meat. It's like you understand that they have other things that are hopefully more important for them to be able to do. And, it's, and as I say that as I do know people that did get arrested for selling stuff at the same point in time, but usually the reasons for that were at some point in time in that chain, they ended up selling, or somebody they sold to a kid that was in high school, that their parents would find it and then call the police. And then the police have no option at that point. What are they going to tell the parent? Look, I can't look into this,
Of course.
And it's, it goes, down that whole rabbit hole where there's more important things, but there should be.
Yeah, there's kids on milk carts. Remember kids on milk cartons? They're looking for it. Like, I guess, hopefully. Now, with all due respect, I respect everybody, but yeah, I didn't think. And if you study the history of it, right when I became a federal agent, it was criminalized, I think, in about October of 90. And if you read the position papers, like DEA was against it being criminalized as it was. It should have just been handled in like the administrative statutes that it were under prescription items. And but supposedly the history of it is a politician. Of course, Joe Biden, his history is vehemently against them, but he was in government back then. He was against them, but it was some guy whose kid couldn't make the Notre Dame football team. And if you remember Notre Dame back in like '88 when they won the national championship, like Stonebreaker and Zorich, I mean, just to see the footage, I'm like, those guys sure lifted hard, whatever. Who cares? It is what it is. I think like us old heads get together. Like, a lot of things was done right back in the past. Like, if you have the money, no one's out there knocking over an old lady and taking her purse to go buy some Deca. I sure hurting her. I mean, if he is, I'll strangle her.
Yeah, exactly.
I got you, buddy. Yeah. But I mean, that being said, there's it is what it is. But it probably much like somebody like me that started their career in '91. Well, really, I started. Even my internships were law enforcement. I took an oath. I started with Boston Housing Court in the fall of '87. So, and then I was a deputy probation officer in Massachusetts. So, like, I take it serious, but there are far, far more serious things to look into than that. You know what I'm saying? But like marijuana was a big deal. Half the states it's legal now. It is what it is. I mean, I'm sure male hormones will probably get there at some rate. You know what I'm saying? It's real. I don't think they talk about it anymore. The reports I would see. I retired from my job in November last year, and I'd see drug reports, and that steroids weren't even on the radar. It was all fentanyl and so forth. Stuff that really will kill you. But
what do you think of the state of powerlifting now?
It's like I try. I have the honor of working broadcasting these athletes. So like when I go to a meet, Dave, I'll get 2 nights before, I'll get they'll send me the roster. And the last meet I did was the Saturday before I flew out here. So it was the USPA. It had a drug tested and a non-drug tested under the same umbrella. It only was 28 lifters because they're going to a regional concept now too. They have there's a plethora of meets out there. It's exploding. But usually I go to a meet now, it's half women, half men. Mm-hmm. I'll get 4 and it's run like a clock. Okay, it's 4 flights. The first 2 flights will always be women. Now, when I did it, there'd be a couple women, and sometimes they put them in the men's 114. Mm-hmm. With all due respect, I mean, I respect anybody that's got the courage to get on the platform. But I think some of this, like, I think it's just different now. Like when you meet a lot of people, some people approach me and like at the gym or something. Occasionally I go to different gyms. I'm like, hey, you're pretty strong. You should do a meet. The first thing they'll tell me is like, I looked at the records. I'm like, did you look at how many home runs Babe Ruth hit before you did Little League? Like, what crap pile activity you want to get involved in the first day you set the records? Yeah. It's probably not that good. Yeah. That's kind of funny. And then like, I had that old super mentality. I got into it to get as big as I could. I didn't pay attention to my weight until when I came back to USAPL after a year. It was always 275. Then they switched it to 264. So that just means I had to add a weight vest when I walked my bulldog, and 10 pounds would go off but these, you see people walk across the parking lot. I haven't seen them in a meet, and they'll walk over and they'll be like, hey, how's your training cycle? Like, did you hit a big, man, it's all weight cut. Oh, this weight cut. Like nobody talks about. Remember, if I hadn't seen you in 6 months, like you were excited, you hit 600 in a triple 3 weeks ago in the board press. You knew you were going to smash a PR on the bench. Mm-hmm. It was like more weight driven. Now it's kind of more body weight class and
coefficient driven.
Yeah. I'll never say anything negative about it. I will say this. The only negative will work easy. I don't agree with the USAPL having a youth division of 5-year-olds putting a bar on their back. I don't think that's a good idea.
I didn't know that was.
They have a youth division. Oh, I've seen it. And all decked out in SPD gear head to toe. And that's the USAPL, not the USPA. Because, when we started powerlifting, they'd have an orthopedic surgeon on the board that would say, on the chairman, of the board, that'd say, hey, how old? And you should be teenager. Like a lot of gyms were. You couldn't even go into a gym. You were a teenager, right? Like,
yeah, I think the first gym that I went into, I had to be 13.
Yeah, and the YMCA I started. I think the signs don't let the kids in here. But I'm not an orthopedic surgeon, but I don't think you should be putting a bar in a kid's back. I mean, they should do something else. If you want to bring back the Presidential Council on Physical Fitness, they can do control your body weight.
Well, that would probably be a good thing to do, just in general, right?
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Yeah. Don't get me started. But I mean, it's I think it's interesting times. I feel, again, like the old thing, about my career and passing in retrospect, when I look at what it's at now, I'm like what high school girls used to write in the yearbook, don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened. Mm-hmm. Like I don't think there'll ever be training crews again. Like, there was a line in the sand. Now you guys, for me, it was the gym was going to close at 10 o'clock at night and I had to work and go to school. I'm going to get there at 7 to get my work in. These 24-hour places now where kids, I've seen the social media where they come in with their headphones by themselves because they're angry at 2 a.m. and stuff like, yeah, you probably should be asleep. There's no crews. Like I love the best things in my life are my crews. Like even though I was in law enforcement, there should be some esprit de corps. Like one of my greatest memories is after Art LeBaire's training with me, right? And first house I owned, he's listening. The next day was the day after Christmas. My doorbell rings. It's him with one of his daughters. She's playing with something. He had a water heater. He's like, your water heater's going to go. I'm going to change it. And I hadn't drained it. Art took it out by himself. Literally, he's like a bear. Like took it, changed it. Like the brothership and the fellowship we had. I don't think now after having broadcast local competitions in Tucson and Arizona, like there'll be guys I see from one gym that don't have other gym mates there. I kind of feel bad for them. Mm-hmm. Like that, but they don't understand it. So you don't waste time lamenting it.
Yeah, I know. It's. You can't explain what they've not ever experienced.
Right.
So it's a weird thing. But the sport's bigger, so it's way bigger, as they're way stronger, so I like to think that, all the mistakes that we've made, they don't make, so they'll make their own new mistakes. So the next generation that comes up will be stronger. But earlier on the podcast I did before this one, we were talking about, I think part of the reason why we're seeing stronger lifters too is because we have a bigger pool coming into it, to where before you if you weren't exposed to it, you didn't even know the sport existed.
Right.
And very few people were actually exposed to it. You just had to be in the right place at the right time. And it kind of just
also
happened out, so I think the first article I ever wrote for Powerlifting USA was called Strength. And somewhere in the article, I said that, powerlifting or powerlifters are basically made up of people that weren't good enough to play college athlete, to be a college athlete, or they were retired athletes. And that's pretty much all it really was. And so from that, we weren't getting the genetic outliers at the same rate that we would see now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
yes,
there was a time when I was trying to figure out, just from the business perspective, how many power lifters there actually were, so, and it was a kind of a daunting task because there's no database. There's really no real, I don't want to say there wasn't computers because there were computers, but the closest I was able to come was to figure out with, Mike Lambert, how many Powerlifting USA magazines go out each month, which doesn't necessarily mean that's all, and then I knew people that ran a couple federations. So at least I was able to figure out the APF and the IPA. And I think I posted something somewhere and it was around 20,000. And then Ricky Crane sent me an email saying that he figured it was just about that same now. If you go to Open Powerlifting and look, it's 250,000 just in the last year, so and one of the interesting things with that is, the multiply raw debate type of thing. At that time when it was 20,000, I think about 3, maybe 4,000 would have been in the multiply range. So it was never some people in my friend group over the years have thought that was the majority. And it was never the majority because they were never looking at the IPF and, how many lifters were actually there, or WABDA, or, some of the other ones that had a ton of NASA. There are a lot of lifters there, or that number the 20,000 may not include Texas high school powerlifting.
Yeah, I was going to speak to that in a minute because I saw that person.
Yeah, that I can't say, but that they are on Open Powerlifting, so you can kind of see that. So from that, and that's probably how many multiply powerlifters there are now. So you can't sit there and say that it's dead. You can just say it didn't grow, right? But now on the other end, you've seen the substantial growth, through the raw, because the barrier of entry is lower. You don't have to buy the gear. You don't have to find a crew. You don't have to find all these other things. And CrossFit probably helped to get more out there, social media to get more out there. So when that talent pool increases so substantially, now you're getting people entering the sport in high school that potentially may have been good enough to be a professional athlete in a different sport, but they found powerlifting and they love that. So now you have that genetic outlier, and 10, 15, 20 years later, or whatever it's been, now we're starting to see that, bubble up through to where I think we're going to keep seeing that, for another decade at least, and more, to where we're going to see numbers there's people now hitting raw numbers in sleeves that are very close to, if not beating, some of the multiply all-time world records, which is insane when you think about that. So to think of where it's going to go, and the training's better, the information's better. So there's a lot of things that I see that are better. I like to look at it more optimistically than looking at it as, all the negative, that gets associated with that. But the one thing that hasn't changed is the drama, with the federations.
Oh, yeah.
And you've been around for a long time as well, and will attest the same, if not disagree. It's always been there. It will never go away. The federation drama, the judging drama, whatever it's going to be, it all goes away. But the thing that I've realized and noticed is whatever that is, if it's IPF versus multiply, drug-free, not drug-free, whatever it's going to be, that shit that you'll see all online, you take the same number of people and you put them in a gym where they're training together, and it doesn't exist.
Oh, yeah,
All
totally.
lifters get along.
Yeah, totally. When I go out in an event in public and stuff, I've seen some occasional negative comments on my social media or something, and I go even further. Like once you get to be our age, like 40 or 50, like how many friends do you men make usually at our age? Like I make new friends all the time. Like I had dinner with Matt Wenning last night, but we only met online. We traded messages and I was a customer, but like he knew my stuff, obviously knew him. Like that's amazing. Like the connection is there and positivity. Yeah, in person, nobody is negative at all.
No, because they all have the same goal to get stronger.
And there's mutual respect because that's your peer. You go out in the world, no matter what you do, like what brings you back to the platform is your peers. Like it's the similar struggle. There's enough, you'll get enough of the regular world and the BS that goes with that in life, and from hassles at your job and the car needs a new transmission to the roof, et cetera, et cetera. But like when you're able to step on that platform, there's a lot right. You're healthy. Nobody's in the hospital right now. It's almost a luxury. When you get older, you look back at it, but when you're younger, you're like, oh, you don't think of it as that. That's kind of a great state to be in. Be grateful, right? Like you're there. A lot's going right when you're out on the platform.
Anything about it that you'd change? Your path?
I probably would have done more work. Yeah, I wouldn't have torn my pec because this pec, like I got it fixed, right? And then came back in 2005. So 2016, I had strained this pec and then got it repaired. Not as bad, stupidly. I got this repaired. Anyways, for the first time ever, I was double overhand deadlifting to keep stress off this. And I popped something in my scapular region. I'm like, oh, what is that? And it hurt to the point where I couldn't control like a 5-pound dumbbell. So I tore my anterior serratus. That's because this is all lined up differently and everything's a little off since right? So I paid the price. And then I had some neck issues on this side. So I would have probably got better therapy and stuff and paid attention to that. But I was like, not cheap. In California, I was administered and cared for by Dr. Horrigan, who was in Powerlifting USA and Ironman magazine, and he had treated on Fred Hatfield. He was a chiropractor, but did deep tissue on my shoulders and fixed them up nice. But I never found anyone like him again. Now I have a therapist in Arizona has helped me out a little bit, so I would have paid more attention to that. But no, I wouldn't have changed a thing, man. It was what a ride, It's so fun.
How would people go about finding you?
My Instagram's Paul J. Leonard, PLUSA. That's all one. I was hacked once, so I reestablished it with all the double factor identification. Yeah. So it's Paul J. Leonard, PLUSA, because I used to write for the magazine. My YouTube is Paul L. P. Leonard 71's attached to that somehow, but just Paul L. Put that in with powerlifting. And man, I appreciate if everybody likes, shares, and subscribes and say hi to me. I love that stuff online. I only have like 3,500 followers, but they're awesome, and this trip to Columbus has been amazing. I spent time at Westside and yesterday and Tom rolled out the red carpet for me, explained Louis' vision going forward. And I got to see that for the first time. I'd met Louis once in person, but never had come over here, and he had invited me and I didn't take him up on it. And, it's great. It's great. I appreciate you having me out. It's like being on the cover of Sports Illustrated for me. This is the premier podcast in powerlifting and sports. So yeah, it's just train hard, folks. If you ever see me, get a hold of me. If you want me to come announce your competition, I do it for the USPA now and USS Strongman events, but I can also do it for other events. I'd love to come out and we can talk. I love to showcase the athletes. That's what it's all about. And make that, I can very politically correct when I don't curse when you hire me to broadcast. And it's tough, and because it's family friendly, you don't want that take to be out there. But no, I've been so excited to come out and meet you and see your team, and your team bent over backwards. Thanks for the goodie bag coming in and the directions to get here. I usually don't go to church, so I was like, oh, turn in.
We're hidden.
Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah, you're strategically located. Yeah, beautiful location.
Yes.
It has to be the most square inch, densely packed, well-equipped gym I've ever been. It's amazing. So appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming out. And guys, we're done. All right, guys, thanks for watching the video to the end. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and click here, 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 or here for more videos.